Today, I've prepared the biography of Bob Marley. Before you fall asleep, make sure to tell us from where you're listening and what time it is. Now, calm down and listen to the story while falling asleep. I'm wishing you a cozy and comfortable night. As you settle into your soft pillows and pull your blankets close, let your mind drift to the warm shores of Jamaica, where our story begins. The gentle rhythm of reggae will carry you through the remarkable life of Bob Marley, whose soulful music continues to touch hearts around the world. His journey from humble beginnings to international icon is a testament to the power of passion and perseverance. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the peaceful waves of this story wash over you as you drift toward slumber. The melodic legacy of Bob Marley awaits you in your dreams tonight in the gentle hills of 9 Mile, a small village nestled in the parish of St. Anne, Jamaica. A child was born on February 6, 1945, who would one day share his message of love and unity with the world. This child was Robert Nesta Marley, known to us now as Bob Marley. As the cool Caribbean breeze rustled through the trees on that quiet morning, little did anyone know that this newborn would grow to become a voice for the oppressed, a symbol of Jamaican culture, and a musical legend whose melodies would continue to resonate long after his time on Earth had passed. The Jamaica of Bob's childhood was a place of contrasts, lush, tropical beauty, alongside the lingering effects of colonialism. The island had been under British rule for centuries, gaining independence only in 1962, when Bob was already 17 years old. The social landscape was shaped by this history, creating a complex tapestry of cultures, beliefs, and social structures that would influence young Bob's worldview. Bob's father, Norval Sinclair Marley, was a white Jamaican of English descent, a captain in the British Army and a plantation overseer. At 50 years old, Norval met 18-year-old Cedella Booker, a young black Jamaican woman from the countryside. Their brief union resulted in Bob's birth, but Norval was largely absent from his son's life, providing financial support, but rarely visiting. He passed away when Bob was just 10 years old, leaving behind a complicated legacy in his son's heart, a mixture of absence and longing that would later emerge in some of Bob's most poignant lyrics. Cedella, Bob's mother, was a remarkable woman whose strength and determination would shape her son's character. Born in the rural community of 9 Mile, she was a farmer's daughter with a beautiful singing voice and a resilient spirit. After Norval's departure, Cedella raised Bob largely on her own, instilling in him values of hard work, dignity, and an appreciation for music that would serve as the foundation for his future. The small house where Bob spent his earliest years was simple, but filled with love. Built of limestone and wood, it stood on a hill overlooking the verdant Jamaican countryside. Inside, the rooms were sparsely furnished, but kept immaculately clean by Cedella. The kitchen was the heart of their home, were the aromas of traditional Jamaican cooking. Ackee and saltfish, rice and peas, callaloo, and fresh tropical fruits would fill the air in the evenings. The soft glow of kerosene lamps would illuminate their modest dwelling. As Sedella sang folk songs and hymns, her melodious voice carrying through the open windows and into the star-filled Caribbean night. As a young boy, Bob would often sit on the porch of their home, watching as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. These quiet moments of contemplation would become characteristic of his thoughtful nature. Even as a child, there was something special about Bob, a certain calm wisdom that seemed beyond his years, a gentle soulfulness that drew people to him. The natural world was Bob's first playground. He would wander barefoot through the hills, climbing mango and breadfruit trees, picking sweet fruits directly from the branches. The rhythm of rural life, the crowing of roosters at dawn, the afternoon rain showers that would drum against the tin roof, the chorus of insects at twilight, became the backdrop to his childhood, infusing him with a deep connection to the earth that would later manifest in his Rastafarian beliefs. School days for young Bob began at the local basic school in 9 Mile, where he was a bright but sometimes mischievous student. The one-room schoolhouse was filled with children of various ages, all learning together under the watchful eye of their teacher. Bob showed an early aptitude for language and poetry, often impressing his classmates with his ability to craft rhymes and stories. His education was traditional and strict, reflecting the British colonial system that still governed Jamaica during his childhood years. When Bob was around 12 years old, his life underwent a significant change. Sedella decided to move to Trench Town, a neighborhood in the capital city of Kingston, in search of better opportunities. This transition from the peaceful countryside to the bustling urban environment of Kingston was a profound shift for the young boy. Trench Town was named for its location in a trench that had been dug for drainage, and it was one of Kingston's poorest neighborhoods, a government yard filled with concrete tenements where many families lived in close quarters. Despite the challenges of urban poverty, Trench Town was a vibrant community, pulsating with creativity and resilience. It was here, amidst the zinc fence yards and concrete structures, that Bob's musical journey truly began to take shape. The neighborhood was a melting pot of musical influences, American rhythm and blues drifting from radios, traditional mento and calypso performed by street musicians, and the emerging sounds of ska and rocksteady that would eventually evolve into reggae. In Trench Town, Bob's education continued at Ebenezer School, but increasingly, his real education came from the streets and yards, where music was a constant presence. He made friends with other musically inclined boys, including Neville O'Reilly Livingston, known as Bunny Wailer, who would become one of his closest friends and future bandmates. Bob and Bunny would spend hours practicing their harmonies, inspired by the American vocal groups they heard on the radio. Life in Trench Town was not easy. Water was often scarce, and families had to collect it from communal standpipes. Electricity was unreliable, and many homes used kerosene lamps for light. Food could be scarce as well, and Bob sometimes went to bed hungry. Yet, there was a strong sense of community, neighbors looking out for one another, sharing what little they had, finding joy in simple pleasures like a game of football in the street or a community dance held under the stars. During these formative years, Bob began to develop his musical skills in earnest. He crafted his first rudimentary instruments from found materials: a guitar made from bamboo and wire, drums fashioned from tin cans and stretched fabric. His natural talent was evident even with these makeshift instruments, and he would often entertain neighborhood children with his songs and stories. As a teenager, Bob was apprenticed to a welder, learning a trade that could provide a steady income. However, his heart was always drawn to music. He would work during the day and practice music in the evenings, his fingers becoming calloused both from welding and from pressing against guitar strings. This period of his life taught him discipline and perseverance, qualities that would serve him well in his musical career. It was during these teenage years that Bob was introduced to the teachings of Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican political leader and proponent of Black nationalism. Garvey's philosophy of self-reliance, pride in African heritage, and repatriation to Africa resonated deeply with Bob. These ideas would later become central to his Rastafarian beliefs and would infuse his music with political consciousness and spiritual depth. In Trench Town, Bob also met Joe Higgs, a respected local musician who became his mentor. Higgs recognized the potential in the young man and took him under his wing, teaching him vocal techniques, guitar skills, and songwriting. Under Higgs' guidance, Bob's natural talent flourished. The hours spent in Higgs' yard, practicing harmonies and refining his sound, were invaluable to Bob's musical development. At 16, Bob met a young woman named Alpharetta Constantia Anderson, known as Rita, who would become his musical collaborator, his wife, and the mother of several of his children. Their relationship began as a musical partnership. Rita was a talented singer in her own right, but soon blossomed into romance. They married on February 10, 1966, when Bob was 21 and Rita was 19. By this time, Bob had already formed the Wailers with his friends Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh. Their early recordings with producer Coxsone Dodd at Studio One captured the emerging sound of ska, with its upbeat rhythms and horn sections. Songs like Simmer Down reflected the social realities of Kingston's ghettos and called for peace among the rude boys or street gangs that were becoming increasingly prevalent. As the 1960s progressed, Bob's musical style evolved alongside Jamaica's own musical development. Ska gave way to the slower, more soulful rocksteady, which in turn evolved into reggae. This evolution mirrored changes in Bob's personal life and spiritual journey. In 1966, Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia visited Jamaica, an event that had profound significance for followers of Rastafari, who viewed Selassie as a divine figure. Though Bob was not yet a practicing Rastafarian, the emperor's visit made a deep impression on him. The late 1960s were a period of spiritual awakening for Bob. He began to grow his hair into dreadlocks, a symbol of his embracing of Rastafarian beliefs. Rastafari provided Bob with a framework for understanding the world, a perspective that emphasized the divinity within each person, the importance of natural living, and the hope for eventual repatriation to Africa. Seen as the spiritual homeland of all Black people, these spiritual beliefs became increasingly reflected in Bob's music. His lyrics began to incorporate Rastafarian themes and biblical references, speaking of redemption, exodus, and the struggle against Babylon, the Rastafarian term for the corrupt system of Western society. His music became more than entertainment. It was a vehicle for spreading a message of love, unity, and resistance against oppression. Throughout these early years, from his birth in 9 Mile to his coming of age in Trench Town, Bob Marley was shaped by the contrasts and complexities of Jamaican society. The rural tranquility of his childhood gave him a connection to nature and tradition. The urban struggles of his adolescence taught him resilience and gave him insight into social inequality. His mixed racial heritage provided him with a unique perspective on identity and unity. All of these experiences would find expression in his music, creating a sound and message that was authentically Jamaican, yet universally resonant as the gentle waves continue to lap against Jamaica's shores. As the moon casts its silver light over the hills of 9 Mile, the legacy of that small boy born in 1945 continues to live on. Bob Marley's journey from a simple rural childhood to becoming a voice for the voiceless is a testament to the power of music to transcend boundaries and touch hearts across the world. His early years, filled with both hardship and hope, laid the foundation for a life that would change the face of music forever and bring the rhythm of Jamaica to every corner of the globe. Let us drift further into the story as we explore the next part of this fascinating journey. In the soft glow of evening light that bathes the Jamaican hills in gold, we begin our gentle journey into the ancestral roots of Robert Nesta Marley, a man whose life story flows like a river through the heart of Jamaica's cultural landscape. Born on February 6, 1945, in the small village of 9 Mile in St. Anne Parish, Bob Marley entered the world as the sun rose over the lush green hills, his first cries mingling with the morning songs of tropical birds. the story of Bob's family begins long before his birth, in the complex tapestry of Jamaica's colonial past. His father, Norval Sinclair Marley, was a white Jamaican of English descent. Born in 1885, Norval's family had deep roots in the island, tracing back to the colonial settlers who came to Jamaica in the late 19th century. A captain in the British Army and later a plantation overseer, Norval represented the European influence that had shaped Jamaica's history for centuries. Bob's mother, Cedella Booker, born in 1926, carried the rich African heritage that forms the soul of Jamaican culture. Her ancestors had arrived on the island generations earlier, brought forcibly from West Africa as part of the transatlantic slave trade. In Cedella's lineage flowed the blood of the Akan people, known for their resilience, spiritual strength, and rich cultural traditions. The Akan influence would later manifest in Bob's deep connection to rhythm, storytelling, and spiritual consciousness. The union of Norval and Cedella was unusual for its time. Jamaica in the 1940s was still deeply stratified by color and class, with relationships between white men and black women often viewed through the lens of the island's painful colonial history. Norval was 50 years old when he married 18-year-old Cedella, and their marriage was not embraced by either of their families. This early experience of existing between two worlds would profoundly shape young Bob's understanding of identity, and his later message of unity across racial divides. The gentle hillsides of 9 Mile cradled Bob's earliest memories. Here, in this rural community, time moved slowly with the rhythm of nature. The Marley family home was simple, a modest structure nestled among banana trees and flowering bushes. Inside these walls, Cedella would sing to her son, her voice soft and melodious as she shared the folk songs that had been passed down through generations. These lullabies carried the stories of ancestors, tales of struggle and survival, joy and sorrow, that formed the emotional foundation of Jamaican folk culture. Though Norval provided financial support, he was largely absent from his son's life, appearing only occasionally before his death, when Bob was just 10 years old. In his absence, Bob was raised primarily by his mother and her family, immersed in the traditions and values of rural Jamaican life. The community of 9 Mile operated like an extended family, with neighbors sharing childcare responsibilities, meals, and the oral traditions that kept their cultural heritage alive. In the cool evenings, as the sun set behind the mountains, village elders would gather children around to share stories. These tales, known as Anansi stories, featured the clever Spider-Man of West African folklore, who used his wit to overcome stronger opponents. These stories, brought to Jamaica by enslaved Africans, contained hidden lessons about resistance and survival under oppression. Young Bob would listen wide-eyed, absorbing these narratives that taught him about resilience, and the power of cunning over might. Music was woven into the fabric of daily life. In 9 Mile, the rhythms of work songs accompanied daily tasks, from washing clothes in the river to harvesting crops in the fields. On special occasions, the community would gather for traditional Jamaican celebrations featuring mento music, an early folk form that predated reggae. The mento bands used handmade instruments, bamboo saxophones, rumba boxes, and hand drums, creating melodies that blended African rhythms with European harmonies. These sounds seeped into Bob's consciousness, planting the seeds for his future musical expression. The spiritual life of 9 Mile was rich and diverse, combining elements of Christianity with African spiritual practices. She was versed in the use of medicinal herbs and the spiritual traditions that had been preserved from Africa. From her, Bob learned about the healing properties of plants that grew wild in the hills, and the importance of maintaining a connection to the natural world. As a child, Bob was known for his quiet observance of the world around him. Neighbors recall a thoughtful boy who would sit for hours under a large mango tree, watching the life of the village unfold. This contemplative nature would later inform his songwriting, with its deep observations about human nature and society. When Bob was 12, life's river carried him and his mother away from 9 Mile to Trench Town, a poor neighborhood in Kingston. This transition from rural to urban life represented a profound shift in his cultural experience. Yet, even in the concrete confines of Kingston, Sedella maintained their family traditions. Their small home became a sanctuary where rural values persisted. She continued to cook traditional Jamaican dishes, ackee and saltfish, rice and peas seasoned with thyme and coconut milk, callaloo greens harvested from small garden plots that residents maintained between buildings. In Trench Town, Bob encountered new cultural influences. The neighborhood was a melting pot of Jamaicans from different parts of the island, each bringing their regional variations of speech, food, and music. Here, the sounds of American rhythm and blues drifted from radios, blending with local musical traditions to create new forms. The area was home to many musicians, and informal gatherings where people shared songs were common in the yards between tenement buildings. It was in this environment that Bob began to develop his own musical voice, learning to play guitar from local musicians and absorbing the emerging sounds of ska and rocksteady. Yet even as he embraced these new influences, the cultural foundations laid in 9 Mile remained strong. The values of community, spirituality, and resistance to oppression that he had learned from his mother's family continued to guide him. As Bob entered his teenage years, he was drawn to the Rastafarian movement, a spiritual ideology with deep roots in Jamaica's history of resistance to colonial rule. Rastafari drew heavily on African traditions, particularly those of Ethiopia, which was seen as the promised land. The movement's emphasis on pride in African heritage, rejection of Western materialistic values, and use of meditation and natural living resonated deeply with Bob. Through Rastafari, Bob reconnected with and deepened his understanding of his African ancestry. The movement taught that Africans in the diaspora should look to Ethiopia, the only African nation never to be colonized, as their spiritual homeland. Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia was revered as a divine figure, fulfilling a prophecy made by Marcus Garvey that a king shall be crowned in Africa, who would lead black people to freedom. The Rastafarian tradition of reasoning, deep philosophical discussions about spirituality, history, and politics, provided Bob with a framework for understanding his place in the world. These sessions, often held around communal meals or while sharing the sacred herb of marijuana, which Rastas called wisdom weed, allowed for the exchange of ideas and the preservation of oral traditions. Food played an important role in Rastafarian culture, and by extension, in Bob's life. The Rastafarian diet, known as Idil, emphasized natural, unprocessed foods, often vegetarian, grown without chemicals. This diet was seen as a way of connecting with nature and rejecting the artificial aspects of Western society. Bob's mother adapted her cooking to incorporate these principles, creating meals that nourished both body and spirit. Music was central to Rastafarian worship, with drumming patterns that traced their lineage directly back to African ceremonial rhythms. The Nyabinghi drumming tradition, with its three-part harmony of bass, fund, and repeater drums, created hypnotic rhythms that facilitated meditation and spiritual communion. These rhythms would later influence the distinctive beat of reggae music that Bob helped to pioneer. As Bob's musical career began to take shape, he drew deeply from these cultural wells. His lyrics incorporated proverbs and sayings he had heard from village elders in 9 Mile. His melodies carried echoes of the folk songs his mother had sung to him. His message of unity, love, and resistance to oppression was rooted in the Rastafarian teachings he had embraced. The Marley family tree continued to grow and branch out as Bob himself became a father. His children inherited not just his musical talent, but also the rich cultural legacy he carried. He taught them the traditions he had learned from his mother and grandmother, ensuring that the wisdom of generations would not be lost. With each of his children, Bob shared stories of 9 Mile, describing the misty mornings and the taste of mangoes picked fresh from the tree. He taught them about their diverse heritage, African, European, and uniquely Jamaican, and encouraged them to find strength in this complexity rather than confusion. In doing so, he passed down not just genetic material, but a cultural inheritance that would inform their own artistic expressions. Bob's marriage to Rita Anderson, a young singer he met in Trench Town, brought together two family traditions. Rita's family had their own rich cultural heritage, with roots in the eastern parish of St. Mary together. They created a home that honored both of their backgrounds, celebrating traditional holidays and maintaining customs that connected their children to their ancestral past. Throughout his life, even as fame took him far from Jamaica, Bob maintained connections to his roots. He would return to 9 Mile to meditate and reconnect with the land of his childhood. He built a house there, a place where the noise and pressure of his international career could be set aside, and he could immerse himself in the rhythms and traditions that had shaped him. The gentle wisdom of Bob's grandmother continued to guide him throughout his life. He often spoke of her teachings about the interconnectedness of all living things and the importance of treating the earth with respect. These values manifested in his music and his lifestyle choices, from his advocacy for natural living to his messages of universal love and unity. As we drift toward sleep, imagining the warm Jamaican breeze rustling through the leaves of the mango trees in 9 Mile, we can almost hear the distant echo of drums, the soft melody of a mother's lullaby, the wisdom of elders shared around evening fires. These are the sounds and sensations that formed Bob Marley, that flowed through his music and continue to resonate across time and space. His family story is Jamaica's story, a narrative of cultures meeting and mingling, of resistance and resilience, of finding harmony in diversity. From the African ancestors who survived the Middle Passage, carrying their traditions in their hearts, to the European lineage that represented both oppression and opportunity, to the uniquely Jamaican culture that emerged from this complex history. All of these threads wove together to create the tapestry of Bob Marley's heritage. As our eyes grow heavy and our thoughts begin to drift, we can take comfort in the continuity of cultural transmission, in the way traditions flow like rivers through generations, sometimes changing course, but always carrying the essence of their source. In Bob Marley's life and music, we find a reminder of how our own ancestral stories live within us, shaping our understanding of the world and our place within it, gently guiding us even as we sleep. The peaceful narrative of this life continues as we turn our attention to what happened next. In the gentle hills of 9 Mile, nestled in the parish of St. Anne, Jamaica, a young Robert Nesta Marley drew his first breaths in a world both humble and rich. The landscape that cradled his early years was a tapestry of verdant rolling countryside, where the deep green of the tropical foliage met the endless blue of the Caribbean sky. As we close our eyes and imagine this serene setting, we can almost feel the warm Jamaican air, heavy with moisture, caressing our skin like a soft blanket. The small rural community of 9 Mile in the 1940s was a place where time seemed to move with the natural rhythm of the sun and seasons. Bob's childhood home was a modest structure, a simple house built of local materials, with wooden walls weathered by years of tropical rains and brilliant sunshine. The tin roof would sing its own special melody during rainfall, creating a soothing percussion that lulled young Bob to sleep on countless nights. This natural lullaby, perhaps, planted the earliest seeds of rhythm in his developing mind. Around the house, the yard was not merely empty space, but an extension of their living area. Chickens might wander freely, pecking at the rich earth, while goats grazed nearby on the sweet grass that grew abundantly in the fertile Jamaican soil. Fruit trees, mangoes, breadfruit, ackee, provided not just sustenance, but also shade from the midday sun, their broad leaves creating dappled patterns on the ground below. These trees were more than mere plants. They were gathering places, playgrounds, and teachers of patience. As young Bob waited for their fruits to ripen, the mornings in 9 Mile would begin early, with the first light bringing a chorus of roosters announcing the day. The air would be coolest then, carrying the sweet fragrance of morning dew on tropical flowers and the earthy scent of the land. Women would already be at work, lighting cooking fires, their smoke rising in thin blue columns against the brightening sky. The aroma of breakfast cooking, perhaps callaloo greens or ackee and saltfish, would mingle with the wood smoke, creating a perfume unique to Jamaican mornings. As the sun climbed higher, the community would fully awaken. Children would emerge from homes scattered across the hillsides, their voices carrying in the clear air as they called to one another. The sounds of daily life would create a gentle symphony. The rhythmic chopping of machetes clearing brush, the distant laughter of neighbors in conversation, the soft thud of bare feet on packed earth paths that connected the community like veins through the landscape. Water was precious in these hills, and the local river was a center of community life. Women gathered there to wash clothes, beating rhythms against smooth stones that echoed through the valley. Children splashed and played in the cooler pools, their joyful shouts blending with the constant murmur of flowing water. For young Bob, these waters may have been his first teacher of music. The consistent bass note of the current, underlying the varying tempos of splashes, voices, and laughter. The natural environment was not merely a backdrop, but an active participant in daily life. The changing patterns of clouds overhead signaled weather to come. The sudden afternoon rainstorms that turned dust to mud in minutes taught lessons about nature's unpredictability. The rainbow that often followed, arching across the valley, spoke of hope and beauty emerging from temporary hardship, themes that would later resonate through Bob's music. Evenings brought a different quality to 9 Mile as the heat of the day subsided and darkness gradually claimed the land. Kerosene lamps would be lit in windows, creating warm, golden points of light across the hillsides. Fireflies would emerge, their gentle blinking like stars come down to dance among the trees. The night air would carry sounds more clearly, perhaps the distant beating of drums from a community gathering, or the soft strumming of a guitar as someone played on their porch. These nighttime gatherings were essential to community cohesion and cultural transmission. Elders would share stories that connected the young to their African heritage, tales that had survived the brutal journey of the Middle Passage and centuries of oppression. These stories often contained hidden wisdom, lessons about resistance and resilience wrapped in entertaining narratives that young listeners like Bob would absorb almost unconsciously. Music was ever present in this environment. It wasn't confined to special occasions, but woven into the fabric of daily life. Work songs helped coordinate group labor and make repetitive tasks more bearable. Religious songs connected the community to their spiritual beliefs. Whether in the more European-influenced Christian churches or in the Rastafarian gatherings that were beginning to gain followers, lullabies passed from mothers to children carried melodies that had traveled across oceans and generations. For young Bob, this immersion in sound and rhythm was formative. The call and response, patterns of traditional songs, the complex polyrhythms of hand drums, the narrative structure of folk ballads. All these elements would later find expression in his own musical creations, but in childhood, they were simply the soundtrack of his world, as natural and necessary as the air he breathed. The social landscape of 9 Mile was as influential as its physical terrain. Jamaica in the 1940s and 50s was still under British colonial rule, and the hierarchies established during slavery continued to shape society. The majority of rural Jamaicans, like those in 9 Mile, were descendants of enslaved Africans, working land that their ancestors had worked under very different circumstances. The memory of slavery was not distant history, but lived experience, present in the stories of grandparents and great-grandparents. Bob's own heritage embodied Jamaica's complex racial dynamics. His father, Bob Marley, was a white Jamaican of British descent, while his mother, Cedella Booker, was black. This mixed ancestry placed Bob in a unique position, neither fully accepted in the white colonial world, nor always embraced in the black communities. This experience of existing between worlds would later inform his universal message of unity and one love. But as a child, it likely created moments of confusion and isolation. The economy of 9 Mile, like much of rural Jamaica, was based primarily on agriculture. Families cultivated small plots, growing food for their own consumption, and perhaps a little extra to sell at local markets. Some worked on larger plantations that grew export crops like sugar cane or bananas. The work was physically demanding, requiring early mornings and long days under the tropical sun. Children like Bob would be expected to contribute from an early age, learning to tend plants, care for animals, and help with harvests. This agricultural life fostered a deep connection to the land and an understanding of natural cycles, the patience required to plant a seed and nurture it to fruition. the celebration of a successful harvest, the communal effort needed to prepare fields. These experiences shaped a worldview that recognized interdependence and the importance of working in harmony with natural forces rather than against them. Religion and spirituality permeated the community. Christianity, brought by European colonizers, had been adapted and transformed by the African spiritual traditions that had survived the Middle Passage. The resulting religious practices blended biblical teachings with African cosmologies, creating a unique expression of faith. Church gatherings were not merely religious obligations, but social events, opportunities for community bonding and mutual support. Alongside Christianity, the Rastafarian movement was beginning to take root in Jamaica during Bob's childhood. Though he would not fully embrace Rastafari until later in life, its presence in the cultural landscape of his youth exposed him to its revolutionary ideas. The divinity of Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia, the concept of Babylon representing Western oppression, and the dream of repatriation to Africa. These concepts resonated with communities still feeling the effects of colonialism and searching for identity and dignity. Educational opportunities in rural Jamaica were limited. Schools often lacked adequate resources, and many children had to balance their studies with work responsibilities at home. Nevertheless, education was valued as a potential path to advancement. In the one-room schoolhouse that Bob likely attended, students of various ages would learn together, the older children often helping to teach the younger ones. The curriculum would have emphasized British history and literature over Jamaican or African heritage, a colonial approach to education that privileged European knowledge systems. Despite these limitations, oral traditions flourished outside formal education. Proverbs, folktales, and songs preserved ancestral wisdom and provided practical guidance for navigating life's challenges. These verbal arts valued quick wit, creative expression, and the ability to use language in multiple layers of meaning. Skills that would later serve Bob well as a songwriter crafting lyrics with both immediate appeal and deeper significance. The pace of life in 9 Mile followed natural rhythms rather than mechanical clocks. Sunrise and sunset, rainy season and dry season, planting time and harvest. These were the markers that structured existence. This organic relationship with time fostered a certain patience and presence, an ability to exist fully in the moment while maintaining awareness of larger cycles. We might imagine young Bob absorbing this temporal wisdom as he watched elders who never seemed rushed, yet accomplished what needed to be done. As evening deepens and our thoughts grow more dreamlike, we can envision the night sky above 9 Mile, impossibly vast and brilliant, with stars undiminished by artificial light. Perhaps young Bob lay on his back, gazing up at this celestial display, feeling simultaneously small beneath its immensity and connected to something eternal. The cool night air would carry the sounds of nocturnal creatures, the chirping of crickets, the soft hooting of owls, the distant barking of dogs, creating a gentle soundtrack for contemplation. In this environment, dreams and ambitions took root. Though 9 Mile was far from the urban centers where recording studios and radio stations would later broadcast Bob's message to the world, the seeds of his future were being nurtured in this rural cradle. The injustices he observed, the community solidarity he experienced, the natural beauty that surrounded him, the music that permeated every aspect of life. All these elements were being absorbed and transformed within him, waiting for the moment when they would find expression. As Bob grew older, his world expanded beyond 9 Mile. At 12, after his father's death, he moved with his mother to Trench Town in Kingston, entering an urban environment vastly different from the rural hills of his early childhood. Yet the formative experiences of those early years remained with him, providing a foundation of identity and perspective that would inform his art and his worldview throughout his life. The contrast between 9 Mile and Trench Town was stark. Instead of open hillsides and abundant vegetation, the urban landscape offered crowded concrete yards and narrow streets. The natural soundscape of birds and flowing water was replaced by the mechanical noises of vehicles and the constant hum of human activity. Yet, even in this new environment, Bob carried within him the rhythms and values of his rural upbringing, finding ways to transform urban challenges into opportunities for growth and expression. As our consciousness drifts toward sleep, we can take comfort in the continuity that flows through Bob Marley's journey from the hills of 9 Mile to the world stage. The same sun that warmed his childhood home continues to rise and set over Jamaica. The same stars that illuminated those rural nights still shine, though often hidden by city lights. The same human yearnings for justice, connection, and meaning that animated the communities of his youth continue to resonate in hearts around the globe, carried forward by the music that emerged from those humble beginnings. In this gentle transition to slumber, we might imagine the sounds of 9 Mile as a lullaby. The rustling leaves, the distant drums, the murmuring voices of a community at peace with the falling night. These sounds cradled a child who would grow to create music that now cradles millions, offering comfort and inspiration across boundaries of time and space. As we yield to sleep, we can rest in the knowledge that such connections endure, flowing like the rivers of Jamaica, sometimes changing course, but always carrying forward the essence of their source. As you relax deeper, let us now softly explore the next chapter of this soothing biography. The contrast between 9 Mile and Trench Town was stark. Instead of open hillsides and abundant vegetation, the urban landscape offered crowded concrete yards and narrow streets. The natural soundscape of birds and flowing water was replaced by the mechanical noises of vehicles and the constant hum of human activity. Yet, even in this new environment, Bob carried within him the rhythms and values of his rural upbringing, finding ways to transform urban challenges into opportunities for growth and expression. In the dusty corners of Trench Town, young Bob Marley's education took a different form than what many might consider traditional. The concrete yards became his classroom, the street corners his library, and the diverse characters of Kingston his professors. His formal schooling was modest and brief. Like many children from rural Jamaica who relocated to the city, the wooden benches of the classroom could not contain the expanding consciousness of a boy whose mind was already attuned to the rhythms of nature and the subtle lessons of community living. Bob attended Stepney Primary School in 9 Mile until his families moved to Kingston when he was around 12 years old. There, he briefly attended Ebenezer Primary School, where the chalk dust floated in the warm air as teachers attempted to instill basic literacy and numeracy. The classroom walls were adorned with simple educational charts, the windows open to catch any breeze that might provide relief from the Caribbean heat. Young Bob sat quietly, absorbing what was offered, while his mind often wandered to the melodies that seemed to float perpetually through his consciousness. The formal education system, with its rigid structures and colonial influences, could not provide the kind of learning that Bob's spirit craved. His schooling concluded around the age of 14, not unusual for children of his background and era. Yet, this end of conventional education marked the beginning of a different kind of learning journey, one that would prove far more significant for his development and for the world that would later embrace his message. In the gentle evening hours, when the heat of the day began to subside and the shadows lengthened across Trench Town, Bob found his true teachers. Joe Higgs, a respected local musician, offered free informal music lessons in his yard to neighborhood youth. The soft strumming of guitars would blend with the distant sounds of children playing, creating a peaceful backdrop for these important sessions. Higgs, with his patient demeanor and genuine passion for music, recognized something special in the quiet boy from 9 Mile under the spreading branches of a mango tree, or sometimes beneath the stars when the night was clear. Higgs would demonstrate chord progressions on his worn guitar. His fingers moved with practiced ease across the strings, creating harmonies that seemed to float on the evening air. Bob watched with intense concentration, his own fingers gradually learning to find the right positions, to create the right tensions and releases that would produce music rather than mere noise. These lessons extended far beyond technique. Higgs spoke of music as a language, as a way of communicating truths that ordinary speech could not convey. He talked about the responsibility of the musician to speak for those whose voices were not heard, to capture the experiences of the community and transform them into something that could touch hearts and awaken minds. As crickets chirped in the background and occasional laughter drifted from nearby yards. These ideas settled deep into Bob's consciousness, becoming part of the foundation upon which he would build his life's work. The education of Bob Marley was also profoundly influenced by the philosophical and spiritual currents that flowed through Jamaica during his formative years. The Rastafarian movement, with its emphasis on African identity, resistance to oppression, and spiritual connection to Ethiopia, provided a framework that helped Bob make sense of his place in the world. The gentle cadences of Rastafarian reasoning sessions, where elders and seekers would gather to discuss scripture, history, and social issues, became another classroom for the developing artist. In these circles, Bob encountered figures like Mortimer Plano, a respected Rastafarian elder whose soft-spoken wisdom carried the weight of deep contemplation and lived experience. Plano and others introduced Bob to the teachings of Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican Pan-Africanist, whose ideas about self-reliance, dignity, and the connection between African peoples worldwide resonated with the young musician's emerging worldview. The teachings were shared not through formal lectures, but through conversations that unfolded naturally, like water finding its path downhill. Sometimes these discussions took place during the preparation of idol food, the natural diet favored by Rastafarians. The gentle bubbling of a pot of vegetable stew might provide a soothing backdrop as elders explained the importance of living in harmony with nature, of respecting the body as a temple, of finding wisdom in ancient texts while remaining attuned to the present moment. The scent of herbs would mingle with the aroma of wood smoke as these conversations continued into the evening. Bob listened more than he spoke, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of cooking fires or oil lamps. He absorbed not just the words, but the entire atmosphere of these gatherings, the respect shown to each speaker, the thoughtful pauses, the occasional laughter that acknowledged the paradoxes of life, the humming that sometimes accompanied moments of particular insight. Music remained central to Bob's intellectual development. In the record shops of Kingston, where fans would gather to hear the latest releases, he encountered the sounds of American rhythm and blues, early rock and roll, and the evolving styles of Jamaican popular music. Artists like Curtis Mayfield, whose socially conscious lyrics were delivered with soulful grace, made a deep impression. The harmonies of groups like the Impressions demonstrated how multiple voices could blend to create something more powerful than any individual could produce alone. These influences merged with the traditional folk music Bob had absorbed in 9 Mile, the mento and Nyabinghi drumming that carried echoes of Africa across generations. The result was a gradual synthesis, a musical vocabulary that could express both personal emotions and collective experiences, that could speak of love between individuals and love of community, that could capture both the pain of oppression and the joy of resistance. the streets of Trench Town offered their own curriculum. Bob observed the daily struggles of people living in poverty, the ingenuity required to survive in challenging circumstances, the moments of solidarity that provided strength in difficult times. He saw how systems of power operated to keep some people marginalized while others prospered. These observations were not abstract lessons, but lived realities that shaped his understanding of justice and injustice. At the same time, Bob was developing his craft as a songwriter and performer. Early recordings with groups like the Wailers showed promise, but also revealed how much growth was still needed. Each session in the studio was a learning experience. Producers like Clement, Coxsone Dodd, and Lee Scratch Perry served as mentors, sometimes harsh in their critiques, but ultimately helping to refine Bob's approach to recording and performance. The process was gradual, like the slow erosion that shapes a riverbed over time. Songs were written and rewritten, arrangements adjusted, vocal techniques refined. Hours of practice in small rooms with poor ventilation, where the air grew thick with humidity and cigarette smoke, built the stamina and precision that would later make Bob's performances seem effortless. The patience required during these years was itself an education in persistence, in believing in one's vision even when recognition remained elusive. Throughout this period, Bob was also learning about relationships with family, with fellow musicians, with the wider community. His marriage to Rita Anderson in 1966 brought new dimensions to his understanding of love and commitment. The birth of children expanded his sense of responsibility and his vision of the future. The formation and reformation of musical partnerships taught lessons about collaboration, about balancing individual expression with group harmony, about navigating the inevitable tensions that arise when creative personalities work closely together. The political education of Bob Marley unfolded against the backdrop of Jamaica's journey to independence and the subsequent struggles to define what that independence would mean in practical terms. He observed how political parties sought the support of communities like Trench Town during election seasons, making promises that often remained unfulfilled. Once power was secured, he witnessed the violence that sometimes erupted between supporters of rival factions, the way ordinary people could be manipulated to act against their own interests. These observations deepened Bob's commitment to creating music that could transcend political divisions while addressing the underlying issues that affected people's lives. His growing understanding of Jamaica's place in the wider world, its connections to Africa, its relationship with imperial powers past and present, its position within the emerging global economy, informed lyrics that moved seamlessly between the personal and the political, between the specific circumstances of Jamaica and the universal human yearning for freedom and dignity. By the early 1970s, the education of Bob Marley had progressed to a point where his music began to reflect a mature worldview, a distinctive voice, and a clear sense of purpose. Albums like Catch a Fire and Burnin' revealed an artist who had synthesized his diverse influences into something new and powerful. The quiet boy from 9 Mile had become a man whose words and melodies could capture the attention of listeners far beyond Jamaica's shores. Yet the learning never ceased. Each tour brought encounters with different cultures, different audiences, different perspectives. Conversations with journalists, with fellow artists, with political figures, with ordinary fans, all contributed to the ongoing expansion of Bob's understanding. Reading remained important. Books about history, about religion, about politics could often be found in his possession during quiet moments between performances or recording sessions. The education of Bob Marley was not compartmentalized, but holistic, not rushed, but organic, not imposed from outside, but driven by inner curiosity and purpose. It was an education that honored both tradition and innovation, that valued both intellectual understanding and emotional truth, that recognized both individual achievement and collective wisdom. In this way, it reflected the very qualities that would make his music so enduring: the ability to balance seeming opposites, to find harmony in diversity, to speak to the particular while touching the universal. As we drift toward sleep, we might imagine the young Bob walking through Trench Town at sunset, absorbing the sights and sounds of his community, processing the day's lessons, perhaps already hearing in his mind the melodies that would one day carry these experiences to the world. The gentle rhythm of his footsteps on the dusty ground, the soft murmur of voices from open doorways, the distant sound of a radio playing, all becoming part of the tapestry of influences that would shape one of the most significant musical legacies of our time. Our soothing biography continues with a look at the next important period in this incredible life. In the quiet corners of Bob Marley's life, where wisdom was passed like a slow, steady river, there were those who shaped him, who whispered truths into his spirit, who left their fingerprints on his music and his soul. These mentors and guides appeared at different times, each bringing something essential: lessons in music, in faith, in survival, in love, and each helping to mold the young boy from 9 Mile into the voice of a generation. One of the earliest influences was his mother, Cedella Booker, a woman whose strength was as deep as the roots of the Jamaican mountains. She sang to him as a child, filling their small home with melodies that carried both joy and sorrow. When they moved to Trench Town, she remained his anchor in a world that often felt unstable. Her resilience taught him that even in hardship, there was dignity, and even in struggle, there was song. She never stopped believing in him, even when others doubted, and that quiet faith would stay with him like a heartbeat. Then, was Joe Higgs, the man whose yard became a school for young musicians. In the afternoons, when the sun hung low over Trench Town, Bob and his friends would gather there, listening as Higgs taught them not just how to play, but how to listen to the music, to each other, to the world around them. He showed them that rhythm was more than beats. It was the pulse of life itself. His lessons were strict, but kind, demanding discipline, while still leaving room for creativity. It was in Higgs' yard that Bob first learned the power of harmony, the way voices could weave together to become something greater than themselves. Later, there was Mortimer Plano, the Rastafari elder who introduced Bob to a deeper understanding of faith. Plano was not just a teacher of doctrine, but a guide to spiritual awakening. He spoke in proverbs, his words carrying the weight of ancient wisdom, and he showed Bob that Rastafari was not just a religion, but a way of seeing the world, one that connected history, struggle, and divine purpose. Under Plano's influence, Bob's music began to shift, his lyrics becoming more than love songs or dance tunes. They became prayers, sermons, calls to liberation. And of course, there were the musicians who walked beside him, who shaped his sound as much as his soul. Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh, his earliest brothers in music, were more than bandmates. They were fellow travelers on a journey of discovery. With them, he experimented, argued, laughed, and created, their voices blending in a way that felt destined. Even when their paths later diverged, the bond remained, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Beyond Jamaica, there were figures who expanded his vision. On tour, he met activists, poets, and thinkers who showed him that his music could be a bridge between cultures. In London, he spent hours talking with journalists and scholars about African history, about colonialism, about the global struggle for justice. These conversations seeped into his songs, giving them a universality that transcended borders. And then there were the quiet influences, the ones whose names might not be remembered, but whose presence lingered. The old men who sat on porches in Trench Town, sharing stories of Marcus Garvey and Haile Selassie. The street preachers whose voices rose above the noise of Kingston, speaking of redemption and revolution. The children who played in the streets, their laughter a reminder of innocence in a world that often forgot it. Bob absorbed it all, letting each lesson settle into his bones. He never stopped learning, never stopped listening. Even at the height of his fame, he remained curious, open, humble. He understood that wisdom was not something you claimed, but something you carried, something you passed on as you drift into sleep. Imagine these voices still whispering his mother's lullabies, Joe Higgs' guitar, Plano's teachings, the laughter of old friends. Picture Bob sitting among them, head bowed in thought, taking it all in before letting it flow back out into the world through his music. These were the threads that wove the tapestry of his life. And though he is gone, their echoes remain, soft and steady, like a heartbeat in the night. Let your mind float with these gentle recollections as we move forward in our story. It was in the late 1950s, when the streets of Kingston still hummed with the rhythms of mento and calypso, that a young Bob Marley first felt the pull of music. He was just a boy then, barely into his teens, but the sounds of the city had already seeped into his soul. The scratchy records spinning in neighborhood yards, the distant echoes of sound systems booming through the night. These were the lullabies of his youth, and when he wasn't listening, he was singing, his voice thin but full of promise, a whisper of what was to come. His first steps into music were hesitant, quiet. There was no grand plan, no vision of fame, just a boy who loved to sing. He would practice with friends, harmonizing on street corners, their voices rising and falling like the breeze. One of those friends was Neville Livingston, who would later be known as Bunny Wailer. Together, they would sit for hours, strumming borrowed guitars, teaching themselves chords by ear. The music was rough, unpolished, but it was alive with feeling. Then there was Joe Higgs, the man who would become their mentor. Higgs was a local legend, a singer with a voice like honey, and a deep understanding of music's power. He took Bob and Bunny under his wing, teaching them not just how to sing, but how to breathe life into a song. In the dim light of Higgs' yard, they learned to control their voices, to let the music move through them rather than force it out. It was here, in these quiet moments of study, that the foundation of Bob's sound was laid. By the early 1960s, the island was changing. Jamaica had gained its independence in 1962, and with it came a new sense of pride, a hunger for something that belonged to the people. The music shifted too, moving away from the American R&B that had dominated the airwaves towards something grittier, more raw. Ska was born, with its bouncing rhythms and sharp guitar strokes, and soon the island was dancing to a new beat. Bob, now in his late teens, was ready to step into this world. In 1963, he formed the Wailing Wailers with Bunny, Peter Tosh, and a few others. The name itself was a reflection of the times, part lament, part rebellion. They were young, hungry, and full of fire. Their first single, Simmer Down, was a warning to the restless youth of Kingston, a plea to cool the violence that simmered in the streets. The song was a hit, climbing the charts and giving Bob his first taste of success. But the road was far from smooth. The music business in Jamaica was tough, a world of hustlers and dreamers where promises were often broken, money was scarce, and the Wailers struggled to make ends meet. There were nights when Bob slept in recording studios, days when meals were skipped to pay for studio time. Yet through it all, the music kept him going. He wrote constantly, pouring his thoughts into songs that spoke of struggle and hope, love and justice. One of the defining moments of those early years came when Bob met Clement Coxsone Dodd, the owner of Studio One, the most influential record label in Jamaica. At the time, Dodd saw something in Bob, a rawness, a sincerity, and signed the Wailers to his label. It was at Studio One that Bob honed his craft, recording tracks that would later become classics. Songs like One Love and Put It On carried the spirit of the times, blending ska's energy with deeper, more spiritual themes. But even as his music gained traction, Bob's personal life was marked by hardship. His mother had moved to Delaware in search of work, leaving him to fend for himself in Kingston. He took odd jobs, welder, factory worker, anything to keep food on the table. Yet no matter how hard life got, music remained his refuge. He carried a notebook everywhere, scribbling lyrics whenever inspiration struck. The streets were his classroom, the struggles of his people his muse. By the late 1960s, ska had given way to rocksteady, a slower, smoother sound that allowed for more emotion in the music. Bob's voice matured too, growing richer, more resonant. He began to explore deeper themes in his songs: Rastafari, social justice, the pain of the oppressed. It was during this time that he met Rita Anderson, a singer who would later become his wife. Together, they formed a bond that would endure through the highs and lows of his career. The Wailers' sound continued to evolve, and by the early 1970s, reggae had emerged as the dominant force in Jamaican music. With its heavy bass lines and hypnotic rhythms, it was the perfect vessel for Bob's message. Songs like Small Axe and Duppy Conqueror carried a revolutionary edge, speaking truth to power in a way that resonated far beyond the island. Yet, despite their growing influence, the Wailers still struggled financially. Record deals were predatory, and many of their early recordings earned them little more than pocket change. It wasn't until they signed with Island Records, thanks to the vision of producer Chris Blackwell, that their music reached a global audience. Blackwell saw the potential in Bob's songwriting and gave him the creative freedom to craft albums like Catch a Fire and Burnin', works that would change the course of music history. And so, as the 1970s unfolded, Bob Marley's voice became a beacon for Jamaica, for the oppressed, for anyone who believed in the power of music to heal and transform. His early struggles had shaped him, tempered him, but they never broke him. Instead, they fed the fire that would light up the world. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine those early days, the heat of Kingston, the hum of a guitar string, the sound of a young man finding his voice. The journey was long, the road uncertain, but every step brought him closer to the legend he would become. And though the years have passed, the echoes of those early songs remain, soft and steady, like a lullaby in the dark, drifting like clouds across the evening sky. We now move to the next part of this calming life story. In the quiet warmth of a Kingston evening, where the scent of salt air and earth mingled with the sound of crickets, Bob Marley and the Wailers began crafting the songs that would echo across generations. The albums Catch a Fire and Burnin' were more than just collections of music. They were living testaments to resilience, love, and the fight for justice. Each note, each rhythm, carried the weight of lived experience, shaped by the struggles of the streets and the dreams of a brighter world. Recording Catch a Fire was a slow and deliberate process, a blending of reggae's raw roots with the polished touch of international production. Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records, recognized something extraordinary in Bob's voice, a depth that could carry messages of revolution and redemption straight into the hearts of listeners worldwide. The album's release in 1973 marked the moment reggae truly stepped onto the global stage, no longer confined to the shores of Jamaica, but rippling outward, reaching ears hungry for truth and soul. And then came Burnin', released later that same year, its songs crackling with urgency and fire. Tracks like Get Up, Stand Up, and I Shot the Sheriff weren't just music, they were anthems, calls to action wrapped in irresistible melody. Bob's voice, smooth as honey yet sharp as a blade, carried the weight of centuries of struggle. The lyrics spoke of resistance, but also of love, a duality that would define his work. The album's raw energy was no accident. It was the sound of a man who had lived what he sang, who understood pain, but refused to let it extinguish hope. As the years unfolded, Bob's music deepened, his songwriting expanding like the roots of a great tree. The 1975 album, Natty Dread, introduced the world to songs like No Woman, No Cry, a ballad so tender it felt like a whispered conversation between old friends. The recording itself was intimate, the sound of fingers sliding over guitar strings, the hum of voices rising together in harmony. It was a song about memory, about holding on to joy even in hardship, and it became an instant classic, a lullaby for the weary. And then, in 1977, came Exodus, perhaps his most defining work. The title track, an epic journey of rhythm and prophecy, moved like a river, steady, unstoppable. The album was recorded in London, far from the palm trees and red dirt of Jamaica, yet it carried the spirit of home in every note. Songs like Waiting in Vain and Three Little Birds balanced sorrow and sweetness, the way sunlight filters through rain. The process was meticulous, Bob guiding his band with quiet intensity, shaping each song until it felt not just heard, but lived. Exodus became a beacon, a musical manifesto that declared freedom was not just possible, but inevitable. But Bob's impact went beyond the studio. His live performances were gatherings of pure energy, moments where music became something sacred. The One Love Peace concert in 1978 was one such moment. On stage, under a sky thick with stars, he called Jamaica's warring political leaders to join hands, to lay down their weapons. As he sang, the crowd swayed, not just to the rhythm, but to the vision he offered, a world where unity was stronger than division, It was a moment of pure alchemy, where song became action, where music didn't just reflect life, but shaped it. Even as his fame grew, Bob remained rooted in the spiritual teachings of Rastafari, a guiding light in his life and work. His songs were prayers, his lyrics scripture for the disenfranchised. He sang of Jah, of Zion, of a promised land not just in the hereafter, but here, now, in the hearts of those who dared to believe. His music was a balm, a reminder that no matter how heavy the burden, the soul could still rise. In the quiet hours, when the world slows and the mind drifts, you can still hear it, the steady pulse of a bass line, the soft strum of a guitar, the voice that carried so many home. Bob Marley's legacy is not just in the records sold or the awards won, but in the lives touched, the spirits lifted. His songs were lullabies for the revolution, melodies that soothed even as they stirred. And so, as sleep draws near, let the music wrap around you like a gentle tide. Imagine the flicker of candlelight in a dim studio, the scratch of a pen on paper as lyrics take shape. Picture Bob, head bowed in concentration, then lifting his voice, letting it rise like smoke into the night. His songs were gifts, not just to his generation, but to all who would come after. And though time moves on, the music remains soft and sure, a whisper in the dark, carrying you deeper into rest. As your breathing becomes more regular, let us continue with the next chapter of our biography. The story of Bob Marley is woven with moments of quiet transformation, those soft yet decisive turning points, where the path of his life bent like a river, finding its way to the sea. Each choice he made, whether in music or in faith, rippled outward, shaping not only his destiny, but the sound of generations to come. Let us drift back to those pivotal moments, moving gently through time, as if carried by the rhythm of one of his own melodies. One of the earliest crossroads came in the hills of St. Anne, Jamaica, where young Bob, then still known as Nesta, spent his childhood. His mother, Sidella, had moved them from the rural village of 9 Mile to Kingston's bustling trench town, a place where poverty and music lived side by side. Here, in the shadow of zinc fences and under the hum of street life, Bob first heard the sounds that would shape him: ska, rocksteady, the voices of the oppressed singing their truth. Had he stayed in the quiet countryside, his music might have carried a different tone, softer, more solitary. But Trench Town gave him the raw, pulsing heartbeat of the people, the stories that would later flow through his songs like a steady current. Then there was the moment he met Bunny Livingston and Peter Tosh, 2 young musicians whose paths would intertwine with his own in ways none of them could have foreseen. Together, they formed the Wailers, a name that echoed both sorrow and hope. At first, their music was light, playful, the sound of teenagers chasing fame. But as Jamaica's political tensions grew, so did the depth of their lyrics. Bob could have chosen to keep singing love songs, to stay in the safety of what was popular. Instead, he listened to the call of something deeper, the voice of Rastafari, which spoke of justice, of liberation, of a spiritual awakening. This shift was slow, like the turning of the earth, but it changed everything. Without it, songs like Redemption Song or Get Up, Stand Up might never have been written, and the world would have missed the anthems that still stir souls today. Another quiet revolution unfolded when Bob decided to leave Jamaica for a time, moving to Delaware in the United States to work in a factory. It was a practical choice, a way to support his young family, but the factory floor was not where his spirit belonged. The music called him back, pulling him like the tide to the shore. Had he stayed, settling into the rhythm of a working man's life, the world might never have known his voice. But he returned to Jamaica, to the studio, to the Wailers, and in doing so, he stepped fully onto the path that would lead him to become not just a musician, but a prophet of sound. The signing with Island Records was another turning point, a moment that could have gone differently. Chris Blackwell, the label's founder, saw something in Bob that others had missed, the potential to bring reggae to the world. But this meant compromises, smoothing the rougher edges of their sound to appeal to international audiences. Some of the Wailers resisted, fearing they would lose their authenticity. Bob, however, understood that to spread the message, the music had to reach as many ears as possible. It was a delicate balance, like walking a tightrope between purity and accessibility. Had he refused, reggae might have remained a local treasure, cherished but confined. Instead, albums like Catch a Fire Asterisk and Burnin' became bridges, carrying the spirit of Jamaica across oceans. Even fame, when it came, brought its own crossroads. Bob could have let the spotlight change him, could have traded his humble roots for the glitter of stardom. But he chose instead to remain close to the earth, to the people. He built a home in Kingston, not a mansion, but a sanctuary where music and faith intertwined. He sang for free in public concerts, gave generously even when he had little. His refusal to let success harden his heart was a quiet act of rebellion, one that ensured his music never lost its warmth, its humanity. Then came the assassination attempt in 1976, a moment that could have broken him. Gunmen stormed his home, bullets tearing through the walls, a warning from those who feared the power of his message. He was wounded, but not silenced. Instead of retreating, he took the stage 2 days later at the Smile Jamaica concert, his arm in a sling, his voice unwavering. That night, he showed the world what it meant to stand firm in the face of fear. Had he chosen to hide, to stop speaking out, his music might have lost its fire. But he sang on, louder, prouder, turning pain into power. In the final years, even as illness crept in, Bob faced his last great choice: to slow down, to rest, or to pour the last of his strength into his work. He chose the latter, recording Uprising Asterisk, an album that felt like a farewell, a final blessing. His tour in 1980, despite his failing health, was a testament to his devotion. When he collapsed in Central Park, the world held its breath. But still, he gave what he could until the very end. Had he stopped earlier, taken the doctor's advice, he might have lived longer. But the music that came from those final months, raw, urgent, luminous, would have been lost. And so, as we trace the arcs of these decisions, we see how each one shaped the legacy that lingers in the air like the scent of rain on warm earth. Bob Marley's life was not a straight line, but a series of bends, each one guided by faith, by love, by an unshakable belief in the power of music to heal. Had any choice been different, the world might still have known his name, but not the same songs, not the same light. Now, as sleep tugs gently at your thoughts, let the echoes of those choices settle around you. Imagine Bob in the studio, pausing before the microphone, weighing the next note, the next word. Every breath a decision, every song a step on the path. And though the road had its stones, its shadows, he walked it with a steady heart, leaving behind a trail of melodies that still guide us home. So rest now, carried by the rhythm of a life well lived, knowing that even in stillness, the music plays on, soft as a whisper, endless as the night. The calming story continues as we gently examine what happened next in this remarkable journey. Bob Marley's life was a tapestry woven with threads of deep connection, each relationship adding its own color, its own texture to the fabric of his journey. Some were soft and steady, like the hum of a bass line, while others crackled with the energy of a live wire, sparking both passion and pain. Yet all of them shaped the man and the music that would echo across generations. From the beginning, family was both his anchor and his inspiration. His mother, Cedella Booker, was a constant force of love. Even in the face of hardship, she raised him in the rural hills of 9 Mile, where the rhythms of nature became his first lullabies. Though his father, Norval Marley, was largely absent, his mixed heritage, Jamaican and British, would later shape Bob's understanding of identity, of belonging, and of the bridges music could build between worlds. Even in absence, these roots mattered, grounding him in a quiet strength that would carry him through life's storms. Then there was Rita, his wife, his partner in music and spirit. They met as young dreamers in Kingston, both drawn to the pulse of ska and the promise of a better world. Their love was not without its complications. Bob's free-spirited nature sometimes clashed with the responsibilities of family, and their marriage weathered infidelities, separations, and reconciliations. Yet through it all, Rita remained a pillar, not just in his personal life, but in his art. She sang beside him as part of the I3s, her voice blending with his in harmony, a testament to the way love could bend but not break. In songs like Turn Your Lights Down Low, the tenderness between them lingers in every note, a quiet confession of devotion amidst the chaos of fame. Beyond romance, friendships were the compass that guided him. Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh, his brothers in the Wailers, were more than just bandmates. They were kindred spirits, united by a shared vision of music as a force for change. Together, they transformed reggae from a local sound into a global heartbeat. But like all deep bonds, theirs was tested by time and ambition. Creative differences led to separations, yet the respect remained unshaken even after parting ways. Bob would speak of them with reverence, knowing that their early days, playing for pennies in Kingston's back streets, had forged something unbreakable. Then there were the mentors, the elders who saw his light before the world did. Joe Higgs, the godfather of reggae, took a young Bob under his wing, teaching him the discipline behind the music, the way to let soul flow through structure. And Lee Scratch Perry, the mad genius of the studio, pushed him to experiment, to let the music breathe in unexpected ways. These collaborations were like alchemy, turning raw talent into timeless art. But perhaps the most profound connections were the ones he shared with his children. To them, he was not just a legend, but a father, sometimes distant, always loving. Ziggy, Stephen, Sadella, and the others grew up in the shadow of his music, but also in its warmth. He would strum his guitar for them, teaching them melodies like other fathers teach bedtime stories. And in those quiet moments, between the tour and the recordings, he was simply Dad, his laughter deep and rich, his presence a comfort. Even in his final days, as illness took its toll, the people he loved gathered close, Rita by his side, his children near, friends flying across oceans to say goodbye. The bonds he had nurtured now cradled him in return. And though his body faded, the connections remained, alive in every song, every memory, every life he touched. So let these relationships drift through your mind now, like the gentle strum of a guitar in the stillness of night. Each one a note in the symphony of his life, each one a reminder that even the brightest stars are held in place by the gravity of love. And as you drift toward sleep, may you feel that same warmth, that same sense of being cradled by the connections that matter most. The music plays on, soft and sure, a lullaby for the soul. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort as we explore the next phase of this soothing biography. Beyond the stage lights and the roar of crowds, Bob Marley's life was woven with quiet, ordinary moments that grounded him in the rhythms of home. In the early mornings, before the world stirred, he would often rise with the sun, slipping out to the yard of his house in Kingston, or the countryside of 9 Mile, where the air was thick with the scent of earth and growing things. There he would tend to his garden, his hands moving gently through the soil, planting herbs like rosemary and thyme, or the sacred ganja he revered, not just as a sacrament, but as a connection to the earth. The act of nurturing life in the soil was a meditation for him, a way to slow down and listen to the whispers of nature. Inside the house, the smell of coffee would begin to drift through the rooms, rich and earthy, the way he liked it, strong, with just a touch of sweetness. He was a creature of simple pleasures, and his mornings often unfolded at a leisurely pace. Some days, he would sit on the veranda with a cup in hand, watching the light shift across the trees, humming fragments of melodies that might later become songs. Other times, he would pull out a chessboard, inviting one of his children or a close friend to join him in a game. Chess was more than a pastime for Bob. It was a way of thinking, a reflection of life's strategies and patience. He played thoughtfully, his fingers lingering over the pieces, his mind always several moves ahead. His love for football was another quiet passion, one that brought out his playful, competitive side. In the afternoons, when the heat of the day softened, he would gather friends, bandmates, or neighborhood kids for a match in the yard or on a nearby field. He played with the same intensity he brought to music, his dreadlocks flying as he darted across the grass, laughing, teasing, fully alive in the moment. Even as his fame grew, these games remained a sacred space where he could simply be Bob, just another man chasing a ball under the open sky. At the heart of his personal life was his family, a sprawling, sometimes complicated web of love and loyalty. Rita, his wife, was his anchor, a steady presence through the chaos of fame and the demands of his calling. Their love was not without its challenges, distance, temptations, the weight of his destiny, but it endured, rooted in mutual respect and a shared spiritual journey. Rita was more than a partner. She was a fellow traveler in faith, a voice of reason, and sometimes the harmony to his melody. Together, they raised their children in a home filled with music, prayer, and the rhythms of Rastafari. The children remember him not as the icon the world saw, but as a father who carried them on his shoulders, who told them stories, who sometimes sat quietly with them under the stars, pointing out constellations. He taught them to listen to the wind, to the sea, to the silence between notes. Music was their lullaby, their playground, their inheritance. Beyond the family circle were his friendships, bonds forged in the fires of youth and the struggles of early days. People like Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh were not just bandmates, but brothers, their lives intertwined in ways that went deeper than music. Even after paths diverged, the love remained, a thread running through time. And then there were the everyday people, the neighbors, the shopkeepers, the old men who sat on porches, sharing wisdom. Bob had a way of making everyone feel seen, of listening as if their words were the most important in the world. His personal philosophy was simple but profound. Love fiercely, live fully, and trust in the divine. He believed in the power of small moments, the taste of ripe mango eaten straight from the tree, the feel of grass under bare feet, the sound of rain on a tin roof. He carried a deep sense of gratitude, often stopping to give thanks for the food on his plate or the air in his lungs. His Rastafari faith was not just a religion, but a way of being, a lens through which he saw the world as sacred, interconnected. In the evenings, as the light faded, he might gather with friends around a fire, passing a chalice, sharing stories. The conversation would drift: music, politics, dreams, the mysteries of life. And his voice, usually so commanding on stage, would soften into laughter or thoughtful silence. Sometimes he would pick up his guitar and play without an audience, just for the joy of it, letting the notes dissolve into the night. And then there were the quietest moments, the ones no one saw, the times he sat alone with his thoughts, perhaps writing in a notebook, or simply staring at the horizon. Even in stillness, he was creating, his mind always turning over melodies, lyrics, ideas. But he also knew the value of rest, of letting the mind settle like sediment in a river. He would stretch out on a hammock, closing his eyes, letting the breeze rock him gently, his breathing slow and even. These were the rhythms of his private life, the planting and the harvesting, the games and the prayers, the laughter and the silence. They were the counterpoint to the fame, the grounding force that kept him whole. And though the world knew him as a legend, those closest to him knew the man, the one who loved deeply, lived simply, and carried the music of the earth in his bones. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine those quiet evenings, the sound of a guitar fading into the night, the warmth of a fire, the feeling of being exactly where you belong. Let the peace of those moments wash over you, gentle as a lullaby, steady as a heartbeat. The music plays on, not just in songs, but in the spaces between the whispers of a life well lived, a love well tended, a spirit forever at rest in the arms of the divine, like a gentle river flowing toward the sea. Our story continues with the next meaningful chapter. In the soft glow of early morning, when the sun was still whispering its way over the hills of Jamaica, Bob Marley often rose with the light. His mornings began gently, unhurried, as if the day itself stretched out before him like an open road. He would step outside barefoot, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet, letting the dew-kissed grass wake him slowly. Some days, he would sit on the porch of his home in 9 Mile, sipping a cup of bush tea, strong and bitter, the way he liked it, brewed from leaves picked fresh from the land. The steam curled into the air as he took slow, deliberate sips, his eyes half closed, listening to the birds greeting the dawn. Breakfast was simple, as most things were in those early years: fresh fruit, perhaps a slice of bread with butter, or ackee and saltfish if the mood struck. He ate with gratitude, savoring each bite, never rushing. Food was not just nourishment, but a small ritual, a moment of stillness before the day unfolded. After eating, he might walk through the yard, inspecting the plants, running his fingers over leaves, whispering to the earth as if it were an old friend. The land spoke to him in ways words could not, and he listened, always listening. By mid-morning, when the sun had climbed higher, but the heat was not yet oppressive, he would settle somewhere with his guitar. Sometimes it was under the shade of a mango tree. Other times inside the small wooden house, where the walls held the echoes of countless songs. His fingers found the strings without thought, the melodies rising like smoke from a fire, curling into the air before taking shape. He played softly at first, testing the chords, letting them guide him. Lyrics came in fragments, scribbled in a notebook with a worn cover, its pages filled with half-formed thoughts and sudden bursts of inspiration. He didn't force the words, he waited for them, patient as the tide. When the afternoon sun grew heavy, he would retreat into the shade, stretching out in a hammock strung between two trees. The breeze would rock him gently, his body swaying in rhythm with the wind. Sometimes he napped, his breath slow, and even his mind drifting like a leaf on water. Other times he simply lay there, eyes closed, letting the sounds of the world wash over him, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children, the hum of insects. These were the quietest moments, the ones no one saw, where the music lived not in notes, but in the spaces between. As evening approached, the pace of the day softened further. He might gather with friends or family, sharing a meal of rice and peas, stewed chicken, or whatever the earth had provided. The food was always cooked with care, seasoned with love, eaten slowly in the company of those he cherished. Conversation flowed like a lazy river, meandering from jokes to philosophy, from memories to dreams. Laughter came easily, deep, and rich, filling the air like music. When night fell, the world grew still. A fire might be lit, its flickering light casting long shadows against the trees. Someone would bring out a drum or another guitar, and the music would begin again, not rehearsed, not planned, but alive, breathing with the night. Bob would join in, his voice blending with the others, rising and falling like the waves on a distant shore. The songs were old and new, borrowed and made up on the spot, but all of them carried the weight of shared history, of joy and sorrow woven together. Later, when the fire burned low and the voices grew quiet, he would slip away for a moment of solitude. Standing under the stars, he would tilt his head back, taking in the vastness of the sky. The universe felt close in those moments, as if he could reach out and touch it. He would exhale slowly, releasing the day, letting it go. Then, with the same quiet grace with which he had begun it, he would retreat to bed. The rustling of leaves outside his window, the last sound he heard before sleep, took him. In later years, when fame had stretched its arms around him, his routines shifted, but never lost their rhythm. Mornings still began with tea, though now it might be brewed in a hotel room in London or backstage in New York. He carried the rituals with him like a talisman, the quiet moments with his guitar, the walks to feel the earth beneath him, the pauses to breathe, to listen. Even in the chaos of touring, he found pockets of stillness, slipping away to write in his notebook or strum a melody only he could hear, no matter where he was. Sleep came the same way, slow, deep, surrendered. His body knew the value of rest, the necessity of dreams. And as he drifted off, the music never left him. It hummed in his bones, a quiet lullaby, a promise of another day waiting just beyond the horizon. So as you rest now, imagine those rhythms, the rise and fall of his breath, the sway of the hammock, the whisper of the wind through the trees. Let them carry you into sleep, gentle and sure, like a song you've known all your life. The music plays on, even in silence, even in dreams. And somewhere in the quiet between night and morning, the melody continues, endless as the sky. As your thoughts grow quieter, we'll continue our peaceful exploration of this fascinating life. Bob Marley's philosophy was like a slow, deep river, always moving, always steady, carving its path through the world with quiet persistence, from the red dirt roads of 9 Mile to the bright lights of global stages. His beliefs were rooted in something timeless, something that transcended place and circumstance. He carried within him the wisdom of the earth, the teachings of Rastafari, and the unshakable conviction that music was not just sound, but a force for healing, for unity, for change. From his earliest days, Marley saw the world through a lens of spiritual depth. Rastafari was more than a religion to him. It was a way of being, a rhythm of life that shaped everything from his diet to his art. He believed in the divinity of Haile Selassie I, the Ethiopian emperor, whom Rastafarians revered as a messianic figure, a symbol of African liberation and dignity. But his faith was never rigid or dogmatic. It was alive, breathing, evolving like the reggae beats he crafted. It pulsed with the heartbeat of the people. One of his core beliefs was the idea of one love, a phrase that became synonymous with his music, but ran much deeper than a catchy lyric. To Marley, one love was a call to recognize the interconnectedness of all people, a reminder that divisions of race, class, or nation were illusions. He once said, "The people who are trying to make this world worse are not taking a day off." It was this sense of responsibility that guided him, this understanding that music could be a bridge where politics had failed. His songs were filled with this philosophy. In Redemption Song, he sang of emancipation from mental slavery, urging listeners to free themselves from the chains of fear and oppression. The words were simple but profound, a gentle nudge towards self-awareness and inner strength. Even in his more politically charged tracks, like Get Up, Stand Up, there was a spiritual undercurrent, a belief that true change began within, in the soul's refusal to accept injustice. Marley's worldview was deeply influenced by his upbringing in Jamaica, a place where poverty and colonial legacies were inescapable realities. He knew hunger, knew struggle, but he also knew the resilience of his people. This duality, the pain and the hope, shaped his music. He didn't shy away from the harshness of life, but he always pointed toward the light. You never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have, he would say. And in his music, strength was never about aggression. It was about endurance, about the quiet power of standing firm in your truth. His personal values were reflected in the way he lived. Despite his fame, he remained strikingly humble, often turning down lavish comforts in favor of simplicity. He preferred the company of everyday people, sitting on porches in Trench Town, sharing stories and laughter. Money to him was a tool, not a goal. Money is numbers, and numbers never end, he once mused, even in the whirlwind of touring. He maintained rituals that kept him grounded. He rose early, brewed his herbal tea, and spent time in meditation or reading the Bible. The natural world was sacred to him. He believed in the healing power of plants, in the wisdom of the earth. He often walked barefoot, feeling the soil beneath his feet, a practice that connected him to the land and its history. Marley's philosophy also embraced the idea of impermanence. He understood that life was fleeting, and this awareness gave his music a sense of urgency and tenderness. Wake up and live, he urged, not as a command, but as an invitation to be present, to savor the moments, to love fiercely while there was still time. His own brush with mortality, when an assassination attempt left him wounded but unbroken, only deepened this perspective. He saw life as a gift, a fleeting chance to make a difference. As the years passed and his fame grew, his message never wavered. If anything, it became more distilled, more essential. He spoke of unity not as an idealistic dream, but as a practical necessity. His words were a balm for the weary, a reminder that peace was possible if people chose it. Even in his final days, as illness took its toll, his spirit remained unshaken. He performed his last concert in Pittsburgh, walking onto the stage with a quiet determination, giving his energy to the music one last time. It was a testament to his belief that life was meant to be lived fully, right up to the end. And now, as you drift toward sleep, imagine his voice, soft but sure, carrying these truths like a lullaby. Picture him sitting under the stars, guitar in hand, humming a melody that speaks of love, of resilience, of the unbreakable connection between all living things. His philosophy was not just in his words, but in the spaces between them, in the pauses, the breaths, the silence where understanding blooms. So let his thoughts wash over you, gentle as the tide. Feel the rhythm of his beliefs, steady as a heartbeat, reminding you that you too are part of something vast and beautiful. The world may rush and roar, but here, in the quiet, there is only the hum of truth, the whisper of wisdom, the endless song of one love. And as you close your eyes, know that this song continues, weaving through dreams, through time, through the quiet dark, where all things rest and renew. With each breath becoming slower and deeper, let us turn to another aspect of this soothing story. From the very beginning, Bob Marley's life was shaped by struggle. Yet each challenge only deepened his understanding of the world and strengthened the music that would one day comfort millions. Born in the quiet village of 9 Mile, Jamaica, he entered a world where poverty was as common as the red dust underfoot. His mother, Cedella, was just 18 when she had him, and his father, a white British naval officer, was rarely present, leaving young Bob to grow up feeling the weight of absence. But even as a child, he carried an unshakable quietness within him, as if he already knew that hardship was just another note in life's melody. When he was 12, his mother moved them to Trench Town, a Kingston neighborhood where corrugated zinc roofs shimmered under the sun, and the streets hummed with both music and struggle. Here, hunger was a familiar guest, and the narrow alleyways could be unforgiving. Yet, it was in Trench Town that Bob discovered the power of song. Music became his refuge, a way to rise above the noise of hardship. With friends like Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh, he would sit on cracked concrete steps, plucking old guitar strings until their fingers ached, turning pain into poetry. They had no money for proper instruments, so they made do with what they had: cardboard boxes for drums, rusted wire for bass strings. But in those humble beginnings, the sound of rebellion and hope was born. The early days of his career were marked by rejection. Record producers dismissed his voice as too raw, too unrefined. The first songs he recorded with the Wailers barely earned enough to buy food. There were nights when he went to sleep with nothing but the echo of a melody in his mind, wondering if the world would ever hear his message. But Bob never stopped believing. He wore his setbacks like old scars, quiet reminders of where he had been, not chains to hold him back. Then came the moment that could have broken him. In 1976, as his music was beginning to reach beyond Jamaica, violence erupted in Kingston. Political tensions had turned the streets into battlegrounds, and Bob, who preached unity, found himself caught in the crossfire. Gunmen stormed his home on Hope Road, bullets tearing through the walls as he, his wife Rita, and his manager Don Taylor scrambled for safety. Rita was shot in the head, Don in the legs, and Bob himself grazed by a bullet. It was a miracle they survived. In the aftermath, most would have fled, silenced by fear. But 2 days later, Bob stood on stage at the Smile Jamaica concert, bandaged but unbroken. When asked why he risked performing so soon after the attack, he simply said, "The people who are trying to make this world worse aren't taking a day off." That night, his music wasn't just sound, it was medicine, a balm for a wounded nation. He played as if every chord could stitch the world back together. Even success brought its own trials. As his fame grew, so did the demands on his spirit. Touring exhausted him, and the pressures of stardom weighed heavy, yet he never let the noise drown out his purpose. When he traveled to Africa for the first time, walking the red earth of Ethiopia. He felt a connection so deep it brought him to tears. Here was proof that his message of one love wasn't just words. It was truth written in the soil, in the faces of the people who welcomed him as family. But the journey also showed him how much work remained. Poverty, oppression, and division stretched across continents, and he knew his music had to speak louder. Then came the illness. A wound on his toe, ignored for too long, revealed a truth he had feared: cancer. Doctors urged him to amputate. But Bob, rooted in his Rastafarian beliefs, refused. To him, the body was sacred, and he would not surrender any part of himself without a fight. For a while, he seemed to defy time itself, touring, recording, spreading his message, as if he could outrun the shadow creeping over him. But the disease was relentless. Yet even as his body weakened, his spirit never did. In his final months, he worked tirelessly, recording songs that would outlive him, planting seeds for a future he wouldn't see. When he stepped onto that stage in Pittsburgh for his last performance, his legs barely carried him, but his voice was as strong as ever. He sang not for fame, not for glory, but because music was his breath, his heartbeat, the thing that made life worth living until the very end. And so, as you let these thoughts drift through your mind like a slow, flowing river, remember this: Bob Marley's struggles were never just his own. They were part of the larger story of humanity, of rising after the fall, of finding light in the darkest places. His life teaches us that obstacles are not walls, but waves. And if we move with them rather than against them, they can carry us to shores we never imagined. So take a deep breath, and as you exhale, let go of any weight you carry. Imagine Bob's voice, soft but certain, reminding you that every challenge is just a verse in your song, and the music plays on, endless and unbroken. And as sleep draws near, let that thought cradle you, gentle, steady, like the rhythm of the ocean, always moving, always alive. The tapestry of this remarkable life unfolds further as we gently explore the next meaningful period beyond the stage lights and the anthems that echo through generations. Bob Marley was a man of quiet moments, small joys, and unexpected depths. His life was not just the grand story of revolution and music, but also one of simple pleasures, hidden talents, and gentle contradictions that made him deeply human. Few know, for instance, that Bob was a passionate chess player. In the quiet hours between rehearsals or after long recording sessions, he would sit with friends, family, or bandmates, studying the board with the same intensity he brought to his music. He loved the strategy, the patience it required, the way each move shaped the future of the game. To him, chess was like life, a delicate balance of foresight and instinct. Sometimes, when the pressures of fame grew heavy, he would retreat to a corner with a chessboard, losing himself in the silence of the game, where the only sound was the soft click of pieces moving across the squares. Then there was his love for football, or soccer, as some call it. But it wasn't just a passing interest. Bob played with the same fiery passion he poured into his music. He was known to organize impromptu matches wherever he went, whether in the dusty fields of Jamaica or on tour in foreign cities. His bandmates often joked that he took football as seriously as his concerts. He was quick on his feet, agile, and fiercely competitive, though always with a smile. Even in his final years, when illness made running difficult, he would still find joy in kicking a ball around, feeling the earth beneath his feet, the wind against his skin, reminding himself that life was meant to be lived in motion. Bob also had a deep, almost childlike fascination with nature. He would spend hours in his garden, tending to plants with the same care he gave to his lyrics. He believed in the healing power of the earth, in the wisdom of roots and soil. Some mornings, before the world woke up, he would walk barefoot through the grass, feeling the dew between his toes, listening to the birds, letting the stillness fill him. It was in these moments that some of his greatest melodies came to him, whispered by the wind, carried on the rustle of leaves. And though he was a man of strong convictions, he had a playful, mischievous side that few outside his inner circle saw. He loved to laugh, to tell stories with exaggerated gestures, to tease his friends with a lightness that made even the hardest days feel softer. Once, during a recording session, he hid all the drumsticks just before the drummer needed them, then watched with a grin as the poor man searched in frantic circles. He was also a man of quiet generosity, often slipping money or food to strangers without a word, never seeking recognition. There's a story of him stopping his car on a dirt road to help an elderly woman carry her groceries home, walking beside her in the hot sun as if he had all the time in the world. Even in his spirituality, there were contradictions that made him beautifully human. He was devout in his Rastafari beliefs, yet he never imposed them on others. He saw faith as a personal journey, not a rigid path. He could debate scripture with scholars, then moments later, joke about the mysteries of life with the same ease. He carried his convictions lightly, like a well-worn book cherished, but never used as a weapon. And then there was his voice, not the one the world heard on records, but the one he used when no one was listening. Those closest to him say he would hum to himself constantly little melodies under his breath, as if music was the undercurrent of his very being. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would wake with a new tune in his head and reach for his guitar, playing softly so as not to disturb the sleeping house. His wife, Rita, would often wake to the sound of his murmurs, half song, half dream, weaving together like a lullaby. Perhaps the most surprising thing about Bob was his love for silence. For a man whose life was filled with sound, crowds, music, the roar of the world, he craved stillness. He would sit for long stretches without speaking, just watching the sky or the sea, or the faces of those he loved, absorbing the world without the need to comment on it. In those moments, he was simply Bob, not the legend, not the icon, but a man who found peace in the spaces between notes. So, as you drift toward sleep, imagine him there, not on stage, but in one of those quiet, ordinary moments, sitting under a tree, a chessboard at his side, a football resting in the grass, humming to himself, eyes half closed, at peace. Remember that even the brightest flames have their soft, flickering hours, and just like him, you too are made of music and silence, strength and tenderness, all woven together in the beautiful, imperfect tapestry of being human. Let that thought carry you now, like a gentle current, slow and steady, deeper into rest. The night holds you softly, just as the earth held him, just as his music holds us still. Breathe and let go. The world will keep turning. The songs will keep playing. And you, like Bob, will find your rhythm again when the morning comes. As you settle more comfortably, our narrative flows onward like soft moonlight across still waters. To understand the world that shaped Bob Marley, we must first drift back to the mid-20th century, when the winds of change were whispering through the Caribbean, and the globe itself seemed to be shifting beneath people's feet. Picture the year 1945, when Bob was born in the quiet village of 9 Mile, Jamaica, a time when the world was just emerging from the shadow of war. Weary, but hopeful, the air was thick with the promise of new beginnings. As nations rebuilt, borders shifted, and people everywhere yearned for peace. In those early years of his life, the island of Jamaica was still a British colony, its people carrying the weight of history, centuries of slavery, resistance, and the slow, steady climb toward independence. The 1950s unfolded like a warm, golden haze over the island, a decade of transition. The sounds of American rhythm and blues drifted over the radio waves, mixing with the deep, soulful echoes of traditional Jamaican mento, and the growing pulse of ska, a faster, brighter sound that seemed to capture the restless energy of a generation. Young Bob, then just a boy with wide, watchful eyes, absorbed it all. He lived in the hills of St. Anne, where the earth was red and rich, where the rhythms of nature, the rustle of banana leaves, the distant roll of thunder were his first music. But the city called to him, and by the time he was a teenager, he had moved to Kingston, a place of noise and motion, of crowded streets and sharp contrasts. Kingston in the 1960s was a city of dreams and hardship, where the ghettos of Trench Town pulsed with life, struggle, and creativity. It was here that Bob truly found his voice, not just as a singer, but as a storyteller for the people around him. The world outside Jamaica was in turmoil. Civil rights marches in America, anti-colonial movements across Africa, the rise of Black pride and Pan-Africanism. All of it seeped into the lyrics he would later write. But in those early days, music was simply a way to survive, to escape, to connect. He and his friends, Bunny Wailer, Peter Tosh formed a group, the Wailers, their voices rising above the tin roofs and alleyways, singing of love, of struggle, of a future they could barely imagine but deeply believed in. The late 1960s and early 1970s brought waves of change that would shape Bob's music forever. Jamaica gained independence in 1962, but freedom came with its own challenges, political divisions, economic hardship, and the lingering scars of colonialism. Yet through it all, reggae music grew stronger, slower, heavier, its heartbeat matching the pulse of a people searching for identity. Bob's songs became anthems not just for Jamaica, but for the world. Tracks like Get Up, Stand Up, and Small Acts carried messages of resilience, while No Woman, No Cry offered comfort, a lullaby for the weary. Beyond the island, the world was listening. The Vietnam War raged on. Student protests shook Europe and America, and the call for social justice grew louder. Bob's music, with its gentle defiance and unwavering hope, became a soundtrack for those who believed in a better world. His embrace of Rastafari, a spiritual movement rooted in African identity and reverence for Haile Selassie, the Ethiopian emperor seen as a messianic figure, gave his lyrics a deeper, almost timeless quality. Songs like Redemption Song and Exodus weren't just music, they were sermons, prayers, maps for a journey toward liberation. By the mid-1970s, Bob Marley was no longer just a musician. He was a symbol, a voice for the voiceless. His concerts weren't mere performances. They were gatherings, almost sacred in their energy. When he played at the Smile Jamaica concert in 1976, just days after surviving an assassination attempt, it was proof of his unshakable spirit. The following years took him across the globe, Europe, Africa, America, carrying reggae to places where people had never heard its rhythms, but felt its truth in their bones. Yet, even as his fame grew, Bob remained rooted in simplicity. He still found solace in quiet moments, sitting under a tree, playing football with friends, gazing at the stars. The world saw a legend, but those who knew him best saw a man who cherished stillness as much as sound. His final years were a race against time as illness crept in, but his music never lost its warmth, its assurance that love would conquer all. When he passed in 1981, the world mourned, but his songs lived on, carried by the wind, the waves, the heartbeat of those who still believe in his message. And so, as you drift toward sleep, think of him not as a distant icon, but as a man who walked barefoot on the earth, who knew both noise and silence, who believed in the power of music to heal, to unite, to remind us that we are all connected. The world that shaped him was turbulent, beautiful, broken, much like our own. But his voice remains, soft and steady, a lullaby for the dreamers, the fighters, the believers. Let that thought wrap around you now, like a warm blanket, as you sink deeper into rest. The night is long, but the music plays on, gentle as a breeze, strong as the roots of a tree. Breathe and let go. Tomorrow will come, and with it, the rhythm of a new day. Let the rhythm of these words carry you further into relaxation as we continue our peaceful journey. Bob Marley's music was more than sound. It was a vibration, a heartbeat that moved through time and space, touching souls across oceans, across generations. His voice carried the weight of history, the struggle of his people, the hope of a world still learning to heal. And yet, it was never heavy. It floated like a leaf on water, effortless and natural, carrying messages of love, resistance, and unity to places where such words had never been spoken so gently. In the beginning, reggae was the sound of Jamaica, raw, rhythmic, born from the streets and the hills, from the clash and harmony of cultures. But when Bob sang, the world leaned in. He didn't just introduce reggae to new ears, he transformed it into a universal language. Before him, the genre was often dismissed as niche, something distant and exotic. After him, it became a soundtrack for revolution, for peace, for everyday joy. A song like One Love wasn't just a melody, it was an invitation, a call to set aside differences and recognize the humanity in one another. And people listened. They swayed. They sang along, even if they didn't fully understand the patois, because the feeling was clear. His influence stretched far beyond music. He became a symbol of resistance, not through anger, but through an unshakable belief in justice. In apartheid South Africa, his songs were banned, yet they traveled underground, passed from hand to hand like secret letters of hope. In Zimbabwe, when the nation finally celebrated independence in 1980, it was Bob Marley who was invited to perform. His presence a testament to the power of music in the fight for freedom. The crowd that day didn't just hear him, they felt him. His words wrapping around them like the warm embrace of a long-awaited dawn. Even in places where his name wasn't yet known, his sound seeped in, shaping artists who would later change their own corners of the world. Punk bands in Britain, hip-hop pioneers in New York, African musicians blending tradition with modernity, all drew from his fearless mixing of politics and melody. His way of making protest feel like a celebration. He showed them that music could be both a weapon and a comfort, that a song could challenge empires while still soothing a tired heart. And then there was the way he lived, simply, openly, without pretense. In an age of rock stars known for excess, Bob walked barefoot on stage, wore clothes stitched by local artisans, spoke openly about his Rastafari faith, a belief system that many dismissed, until he made it impossible to ignore. He didn't just sing about natural living, he embodied it, growing his own food, respecting the earth, finding divinity in the ordinary. To some, it was mysticism. To him, it was just common sense, and slowly, the world began to see wisdom in his ways. The global embrace of reggae culture, the dreadlocks, the colors of red, gold, and green, reverence for nature can be traced back to his quiet insistence that there was another way to be. Public perception of him shifted over time, as it often does with those who leave too soon. In the early days, critics called him a rebel, a troublemaker, his messages too radical for mainstream ears. But as years passed, the edges softened in memory, not because his fire dimmed, but because the world caught up to his vision. What once seemed radical calls for unity, for an end to oppression, for love as a political act, began to feel like simple truth. Governments that once feared his influence now honored him with plaques and proclamations. Universities studied his lyrics as poetry. Children who had never known a world without his songs sang them in schoolyards, unaware of the battles they once represented, only knowing that the melodies felt like home. His cultural footprint is everywhere, if you know where to look. In the way reggae rhythms pulse through pop songs, in the way activists quote his lyrics on protest signs, in the way a single phrase, "Don't worry about a thing," can still calm a room. His face, framed by those iconic locks, smiles from t-shirts in Tokyo, murals in Brazil, posters in college dorm rooms. He is no longer just a man, but an idea, a feeling, a reminder that music can do more than entertain it, can change the course of a life. And yet, for all the grandness of his legacy, there is something deeply personal in how people carry him with them. A father humming 3 little birds to his child at bedtime, a traveler finding courage in redemption song on a lonely road, a couple swaying to "Is This Love?" at a backyard wedding. These are the quiet ways his music lives on, not as monuments, but as moments, small, sacred, stitching themselves into the fabric of everyday life. So as you rest tonight, let the thought of him linger not as a distant legend, but as a presence, gentle and steady. The world he dreamed of is still unfolding, still being written in the hearts of those who hear his call. And though he is gone, his rhythm remains in the rustle of leaves, the crash of waves, the pulse of your own breath as it slows, as it settles, as it carries you into sleep. The music never really ends. It simply changes form, moving through time, through you, as soft as a whisper, as endless as the sky. Close your eyes now. Let the night hold you. And somewhere beneath the silence, you might just hear it, the faint strum of a guitar, the echo of a voice that still believes in us, even now. Breathe, rest. The song goes on. With the gentleness of falling snow, we transition now to another meaningful chapter in this life story. There is a story about Bob Marley that few people know, a small moment that reveals the kindness in his heart. One evening after a recording session in Kingston, he walked outside and saw a young boy sitting on the curb, barefoot and hungry. Without hesitation, Bob sat beside him and asked his name. The boy whispered that he had nowhere to sleep. Without another word, Bob took him by the hand, brought him to a nearby cafe, and ordered him a full meal. Then, He quietly arranged for a place for the boy to stay that night. No cameras, no fanfare, just a simple act of generosity. The boy never forgot it. And years later, he would tell people that Bob Marley didn't just sing about love, he lived it. In the smallest, most ordinary ways. Even at the height of his fame, Bob carried the spirit of his humble beginnings. He grew up in the village of 9 Mile, surrounded by the green hills of Jamaica, where the air smelled of earth and growing things. His mother, Cedella, would tell stories by firelight, and the sound of her voice, warm and steady, stayed with him always. As a child, he would sit outside under the stars, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of radios playing American soul music. It was in those quiet nights that he first felt the rhythm in his bones, the call to make music that would move people. One of his earliest memories was of an old guitar, battered and missing strings, that a neighbor had thrown away. Bob, still just a boy, dragged it home and spent days trying to make it playable. His fingers bled from the rough edges, but he kept at it, plucking out notes until they became melodies. That broken guitar was his first teacher, and from it, he learned patience, perseverance, the understanding that beauty could come from something others had discarded. Years later, when the Wailers were just starting out, money was scarce. They would often play for little more than a meal, sleeping on floors or in the backs of vans. But even then, Bob had a way of turning hardship into something light. One night, after a show where only a handful of people showed up, the band was downhearted. Bob, instead of complaining, took out a football and started juggling it with his feet, laughing as the others joined in. Soon, they were all playing in the empty lot behind the venue, forgetting their troubles in the simple joy of the game. That was his gift, finding laughter even when things were hard. There's another story, from the time he was nearly killed in an assassination attempt. It was 1976, and tensions in Jamaica were high. Gunmen stormed his house, bullets tearing through the walls. Bob was shot in the arm and chest, but he survived. What few people know is that just 2 days later, he walked on stage at the Smile Jamaica concert, bandaged and in pain, and played one of the most powerful performances of his life. When asked why he didn't cancel, he simply said, "The people who are trying to make this world worse are not taking a day off." His faith was as deep as the ocean, and it guided him in ways, both big and small. He carried a small Bible with him everywhere, its pages worn from reading. But he didn't just preach, he listened. Once, while touring in Africa, he met an elder who told him stories of their ancestors, of the spirits in the wind and the wisdom of the land. Bob sat with him for hours, not as a star, but as a student, absorbing every word. Later, he would weave those lessons into his music, letting them ripple out to the world. Even his love of football was more than just a game. He saw it as a kind of meditation, a way to stay grounded. While recording Exodus in London, He would take breaks to play in the park with strangers, laughing as the ball sailed between them. To him, it was a reminder that joy didn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as a ball at your feet, the grass beneath you, the sky wide open above. In his final days, when illness had taken much of his strength, he still found moments of light. He would sit in the garden of his home in Miami, watching the sun set over the trees, listening to the birds. It wasn't a lament, just a quiet truth, spoken as gently as a breath. And now, as you lie here, drifting toward sleep, you can almost feel the weight of those stories, soft as a blanket settling over you. The boy who mended a broken guitar, the man who played on despite his wounds, the legend who never stopped believing in the power of love. Even when the world was hard, his voice still lingers, not in the grand echoes of fame, but in the small, quiet spaces, the rustle of leaves, the hum of a distant melody, the rhythm of your own slowing heartbeat. So let yourself drift, carried by the tide of memory and music. Somewhere in the stillness, he is still singing, still believing, still reminding you that the song never really ends. It just changes form, like the wind, like the night, like the gentle pull of sleep. Breathe, rest. The music goes on. As your eyelids grow heavier, we'll softly explore another dimension of this fascinating biography. In the golden glow of his later years, Bob Marley moved through the world like a man both burdened and blessed, carrying the weight of his message, yet lifted by the knowledge that his music had become something far greater than himself. His voice, roughened by time and struggle, still carried the same warmth, the same conviction, the same unwavering belief in love and justice. Even as his body weakened, his spirit burned brighter than ever, and the songs he wrote in those final years seemed to float on the air like prayers, soft and insistent, impossible to ignore. By the late 1970s, his music had traveled far beyond the shores of Jamaica, reaching every corner of the earth. His words, simple, direct, yet profound, spoke to the hearts of people who had never set foot on a Caribbean island, farmers in Africa, factory workers in England, students in America. All found solace and strength in his melodies. His concerts became more than performances. They were gatherings, almost sacred in their intensity, where thousands sang together, swaying like a single body under the open sky. And at the center of it all, Bob stood, dreadlocks swaying, sweat glistening on his skin, his guitar a living extension of his hands. Yet even as his fame grew, so did the shadows. A wound on his toe, ignored for too long, revealed a deeper sickness, one that would not be healed. Cancer moved through him quietly, a thief in the night, stealing his strength, but never his will. Doctors urged him to rest, to stop touring, to let his body recover. But how could he stop? There were still songs to sing, still people to reach. So he played on, even when his voice grew thin, even when the pain made every step an effort. In 1980, he performed what would be his final concert in Pittsburgh, his body frail, but his presence as commanding as ever. The crowd, sensing something bittersweet in the air, sang along with a reverence that bordered on farewell. His last album, Uprising Asterisk, arrived like a final gift, songs that shimmered with hope even as they acknowledged struggle. Redemption Song, perhaps his most personal work, was just his voice and an acoustic guitar. Stripped bare of all embellishment, it felt like a confession, a lullaby, a last testament. The words were gentle, but carried the weight of a lifetime's wisdom. When he passed in May 1981, the world mourned not just a musician, but a prophet, a healer, a man who had given voice to the voiceless. In Jamaica, his funeral was a state event, attended by thousands who lined the streets, their heads bowed, their hands raised in salute. His casket, draped in the colors of the Ethiopian flag, held a guitar, a Bible, and a stalk of ganja, symbols of the life he had lived, the faith he had kept, the truths he had never stopped speaking. And yet, in the quiet that followed, something remarkable happened. His music did not fade. It grew. It seeped into the soil of cultures far and wide, taking root in places he had never seen. Children born decades after his death would hear his voice and feel as though he were singing directly to them. His face, smiling from posters and murals, became more than an image. It became an icon of resistance, of joy, of unity. Governments fell, movements rose, and through it all, his songs were there, humming in the background, a steady rhythm beneath the chaos of history. Even now, if you listen closely on a warm evening, when the air is thick with the scent of blossoms and the distant murmur of a radio, you might catch a fragment of one of his melodies, a few notes of 3 little birds, perhaps, drifting through an open window, or the deep, reassuring pulse of no woman, no cry, rising from a street musician's guitar. The sound wraps around you like an old friend, familiar and comforting. And for a moment, it's as if he never left. His legacy is not just in records sold or awards won, but in the quiet, everyday moments when someone, somewhere, finds courage in his words. A mother singing "One Love" to her child at bedtime. A protester holding a sign with his lyrics painted in bold letters. A traveler far from home hearing "Jammin'" on a distant speaker and feeling, just for a second, a little less alone. So as you lie here, letting the night cradle you, remember this: the music never really stops. It changes, shifts, finds new voices, new ears. But the heart of it remains the same, and somewhere, in the spaces between waking and dreaming, Bob Marley is still there, still singing, still reminding you that love is the answer, that every little thing is gonna be all right. Breathe in. Let the melody carry you, and as you drift, know that his song is now part of yours, woven into the quiet rhythm of your breath, the steady beat of your heart. The music goes on, and on, and on. The gentle cadence of our story continues, flowing like anger, a peaceful stream through the next chapter. The voice of Bob Marley still hums through the world like a quiet breeze, rustling through the leaves of time, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. His music was never just sound, it was a heartbeat, a pulse that matched the rhythm of struggle, love, and hope. And though decades have passed since his songs first traveled across radios and record players, they have not faded. Instead, they have grown deeper, richer, weaving themselves into the fabric of generations who never knew him, but still feel him. Picture a small school in Kingston, where children with bright eyes and eager voices learn not just math and science, but the history of reggae, the poetry of resistance, the power of words set to rhythm. Their teachers tell them of a man who believed music could change the world, and they nod knowingly, because they have already felt it when their parents played Three Little Birds on difficult mornings, or when the whole neighborhood gathered for a street festival, and the air filled with the familiar strum of a guitar. These children, too young to remember a time before his songs existed, are already carrying his legacy forward, humming the tunes they do not yet understand, but already love. Across the ocean, in cities where the winters are long and the nights are cold, his voice still warms the air. A cafe in London, its walls lined with vinyl records, plays Redemption's song on a quiet afternoon. And for a moment, the clinking of cups and murmurs of conversation soften as the words sink in. A young musician sits in the corner, fingers tracing the chords on a worn notebook, dreaming of writing something that might mean as much to someone else. This is how his influence lives, not in grand monuments or museum exhibits, though those exist too, but in the quiet moments when someone hears a melody and feels less alone. When a protester in Johannesburg holds a sign bearing his lyrics, or when a nurse in Tokyo hums "No Woman, No Cry" to soothe a restless patient. His words were never meant to stay locked in the past. They were seeds, scattered by the wind, taking root wherever they found fertile ground. And the music has grown, evolved, been reinterpreted in ways he might never have imagined. Young artists today, rappers, soul singers, even classical composers, find inspiration in his fearless blending of sound and message. They sample his rhythms, quote his lyrics, borrow his spirit. Some, like Chronics and Coffee, carry reggae into new territories, infusing it with modern beats while keeping its soul intact. Others, like Lauryn Hill or Damian Marley, weave his themes of justice and unity into hip-hop, proving that the message is timeless, even if the sound shifts with the years. Even beyond music, his ideas ripple outward. Environmental activists invoke his reverence for nature when they speak of protecting the earth. Community organizers use his calls for unity to bridge divides in fractured neighborhoods. The phrase "One Love" appears on posters, murals, protest banners, shorthand for a vision of the world where no one is left behind. It is a simple phrase, but it carries weight because it was never just a lyric. It was a way of living. And then there are the places where his presence lingers like a gentle shadow. The Bob Marley Museum in Kingston, where visitors walk through the rooms he once called home, touching the same walls, standing beneath the same trees. It is not a shrine to a ghost, but a living space where his energy still feels close. Or the streets of Trench Town, where young musicians gather near the very spots he once played, as if the air itself still holds the echoes of his guitar. But perhaps the most enduring part of his legacy is the way his music comforts without pretending the world is perfect. He sang of love, yes, but also of hunger, of injustice, of the long road to freedom. His songs were not lullabies meant to make people forget their troubles. They were anthems to help them face those troubles with courage. And that is why, even now, when someone feels lost or weary, they can press play on Get Up, Stand Up, and feel something stir inside them, not anger, not despair, but the quiet strength to keep going. So as you lie here tonight, listening to the faint sounds of the world outside your window, remember this. The man who sang those songs is gone, but the music is still here. It is in the hum of a street performer's guitar, in the chorus of voices singing along at a concert, in the lullaby a parent whispers to a child. It is in you, too, in the way you carry his words without even realizing it when you tell a friend, every little thing is gonna be all right. When you choose kindness over division, when you believe, even for a moment, that love can heal what is broken. His voice may have faded into memory, but the song continues. It rises in new voices, takes new shapes, finds new ears. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between waking and dreaming, the chords still ring out, gentle as a whisper, steady as a heartbeat. So breathe deep. Let the music wrap around you like a blanket. And as you drift, know this, the world is still singing his song, and it always will be. Wrapped in the comfort of these words, we'll drift together into the next part of this soothing biography. Bob Marley's name is whispered in dorm rooms, hummed in coffee shops, and shouted at festivals. His face smiles from posters and t-shirts, his dreadlocks spilling like dark rivers over his shoulders. But somewhere along the way, the man became a myth. His story smoothed over, simplified, turned into something almost too perfect to be real. We like our legends tidy. We like them to fit neatly into the stories we tell ourselves. And so, over time, Bob Marley became more symbol than man, a smiling prophet of peace, a carefree stoner, a gentle soul who only sang of love and unity. But the truth, as it always does, runs deeper, quieter, more complicated than that. Let's begin with the music itself. Many people hear the reggae rhythm, the laid-back groove, and assume it is music meant only for relaxation, for sunny afternoons and lazy beach days. And yes, it can be that. But listen closer, beneath the easy sway of the bass line, beneath the honeyed warmth of Bob's voice, there is urgency, there is protest, there is fire. Songs like Get Up, Stand Up, and War were not just melodies, they were manifestos. They carried the weight of centuries of struggle, the echoes of slavery, the cries for justice. Even Redemption Song, with its quiet acoustic strumming, is a call to arms, a demand for emancipation, not just of the body, but of the mind. Bob did not sing only of love, he sang of revolution, and yet, in the years since his passing, that revolutionary edge has sometimes been sanded down, turned into something softer, more palatable. His image has been used to sell everything from headphones to soda, his words stripped of their political weight and repackaged as feel-good slogans. It is not wrong to find comfort in his music, but it is worth remembering that comfort was never his only intention. Then there is the matter of his faith. Rastafari, the spiritual path Bob followed, is often misunderstood, reduced to little more than dreadlocks and cannabis. But Rastafari is a rich, complex belief system, one that ties together African identity, biblical teachings, and a deep reverence for nature. It speaks of Haile Selassie, the Ethiopian emperor seen by many Rastas as divine, and it carries a vision of liberation, of returning to Zion, both a physical and spiritual homeland. Bob's faith was not a costume. It was the core of his being, the lens through which he saw the world. He did not smoke marijuana simply to relax. For him, it was a sacrament, a way to deepen meditation, to draw closer to the divine. His dreadlocks were not just a style, they were a covenant, a rejection of Babylon, the corrupt system he believed sought to oppress the African diaspora. But in popular culture, these nuances often fade. Rastafari becomes a shorthand for chill, for a laid-back lifestyle divorced from its roots. The depth of Bob's devotion is flattened into something simpler, easier to digest, easier to sell. Even his personal life was more layered than the stories often suggest. He was a man of contradictions, a spiritual guide who also had human flaws, a voice for unity who still navigated the complexities of relationships, fatherhood, and fame. He had 11 children by 7 women, a fact that sometimes sits uneasily beside his image as a paragon of peace and righteousness. And yet, these contradictions do not diminish him. If anything, they make him more real, more relatable. He was not a saint. He was a man who carried immense gifts, who spoke truths that still resonate, but who also stumbled, who lived fully in the messy, imperfect world we all know. There is another myth, too, that Bob Marley belonged only to Jamaica, or only to reggae, or only to the past. But his music was never so confined. It borrowed from ska, from rocksteady, from American soul and blues. It traveled across oceans, took root in new soils, inspired artists from every corner of the globe. And it still does. When you hear a folk singer strumming a protest song, when you hear a rapper speak of justice, when you hear a pop artist weave a message of hope into their lyrics, Somewhere in that lineage, Bob's voice echoes. His influence did not end when he left this earth. It ripples outward, touching new generations in ways he could never have imagined. So as you lie here tonight, listening to the faint sounds of the world outside your window, remember this: the man who sang those songs was not just a symbol. He was flesh and blood, full of light and shadow, just like all of us. His music was not just for easy listening. It was a mirror held up to the world, showing both its beauty and its brokenness. But perhaps the greatest myth of all is that his story is over. It is not. Every time someone hums Three Little Birds to calm a child, every time a crowd joins together to sing One Love, every time a person hears his voice and feels, just for a moment, that change is possible, Bob is still here, not as a perfect legend, but as a real, breathing presence, still speaking, still singing, still guiding. The world may have simplified him, but the music never did. It remains as vast and deep as the ocean, as alive as the wind in the trees. So breathe deep, let it carry you. And as you drift, know that even in the quietest moments, the song goes on. Now, as we continue our gentle journey through this remarkable life, let us explore the next chapter. As you lie here, wrapped in the quiet of the night, let the story of Bob Marley settle softly around you like a warm blanket. His life was not just one of music, but of movement, of a spirit that refused to be confined by borders, by poverty, or even by time itself. Born in the small village of 9 Mile, Jamaica, where the green hills rolled like waves and the air hummed with the songs of crickets and distant drums, he carried the rhythms of the earth in his bones. From those humble beginnings, his voice would one day rise like smoke from a fire, curling its way around the world, whispering truths that still echo in the hearts of millions. Think of him as a young boy, barefoot and curious, listening to the radio late at night, when the static crackled with the sounds of American soul and R&B. Those early melodies shaped him, but it was the heartbeat of Jamaica, the pulse of ska, rocksteady, and eventually reggae, that gave his music its soul. With the Wailers, he didn't just make songs, he built bridges between people, stitching together the struggles of the oppressed with the universal longing for freedom. His lyrics were simple, yet they carried the weight of prophecy. Get up, stand up, he sang, not as a command, but as an invitation, a reminder that even the smallest voice could shake the foundations of injustice. And then there was Rastafari, the spiritual path that became his compass. It wasn't just a religion to him, it was a way of seeing. The world was Babylon, a place of chaos and greed, but within it, there was Zion, a promise of peace, of return, of home. His dreadlocks weren't just a style, they were a covenant, a refusal to conform to the systems that sought to erase his identity. His songs became psalms for the dispossessed, lullabies for the weary, anthems for those who dared to dream of something better. Of course, he was no saint. He was flesh and bone, flawed and human. He loved deeply, sometimes recklessly, leaving behind a trail of relationships as complicated as his music was clear. He wrestled with fame, with family, with the creeping shadow of illness that would one day claim him far too soon. But even in his pain, he never stopped creating. In his final days, weak from cancer, he insisted on performing one last time in Pittsburgh, as if to prove that the spirit could outlast the body. And then, at just 36 years old, he was gone, but not really. Because here's the thing about Bob Marley. His story didn't end in that hospital bed in Miami. It rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. His music didn't fade, it multiplied. In the years since his passing, his face has become one of the most recognizable in the world, stamped on t-shirts, posters, and murals from Kingston to Tokyo. But he's more than an image, more than a symbol. He's a presence. When you hear Redemption's song playing softly from a neighbor's window, or when a street musician strums the opening chords of No Woman, No Cry, you feel him there, not as a ghost, but as a friend. His influence stretches far beyond reggae. Hip-hop artists sample his beats. Pop stars cite him as their inspiration. And activists still use his words as rallying cries. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the way his music feels like coming home, no matter where you're from. A child in Brazil, a fisherman in Senegal, a student in Berlin, all can close their eyes and be transported by that voice, by those melodies that seem to have always existed, like the wind or the tides. And then there are the quieter moments, the ones that don't make headlines. Her voice soft with exhaustion, but steady with love. A group of friends around a campfire, strumming a guitar, harmonizing on one love as the embers glow. A solitary traveler on a night bus, headphones on, letting Stir It Up ease the loneliness of the road. These are the ways he lives on, not as a distant icon, but as a companion in the everyday. So as you drift now, let the thought of him linger gently in your mind. Picture him smiling, guitar in hand, the sun setting behind him in hues of gold and red. The world tried to box him in, to call him a rebel, a prophet, a star. But he was always too vast for labels. His music was a river, and we're all just wading in its currents, carried along by something greater than ourselves. And if you listen closely, in the space between your breaths, you might just hear it, the faintest hum of a melody, the ghost of a rhythm, the echo of a man who believed in the power of song to heal, to unite, to remind us that we're never truly alone. So close your eyes now. Let your thoughts slow like the turning of a record coming to rest. The night is warm, the air is still, and somewhere out there, the music plays on. Sleep, dear listener, and may your dreams be as peaceful as a Marley lullaby, as endless as his legacy, and as full of hope as his undying refrain. Every little thing is gonna be all right.